3 minutes after 10 is the time. Everyone relax, I'm back. Would you like to hear a little bit of hubbub? Hubbubish? Hubbub-esque? Not exactly full hubbub, Keith, but hubbubish nevertheless. That's an very odd word to say that. I'm not sure I've ever said it in my life before, or indeed ever will again. There was a branch of a brand, wasn't there, of bubblegum back in the day, I think. Keir Starmer is about to deliver a speech which
Morning.
Is important, so pay attention.
Sunshine, no rain, welcome. Sunshine, no rain, no wind. Probably tempting fate, but it's really good to see you all here, see familiar faces in this garden. So thank you so much for coming along this morning. When I stood on the steps of Downing Street, just over there 2 months ago, I promised that this government would serve people like you. Apprentices, teachers, nurses, small business owners, firefighters, those serving our community and our country every day. I promised that we would get a grip on the problems that we face and that we would be judged by our actions, not by our words. I said before the election, and I say it again really clearly today, growth, and frankly by that I do mean wealth creation, is the #1 priority of this Labour government. And that's why in our first few weeks we've set up the National Wealth Fund, because we want every person and every community to benefit. It's why we've unlocked planning decisions, because we're going to build 1.5 million new homes. It's why we set up Great British Energy, to create good jobs and cut people's bills. And it's why we ended the national strikes that have crippled our country for years. Because I defy anyone to tell me that you can grow the economy when people can't get to work because the transport system is broken, or can't return to work because they're stuck on an NHS waiting list. We've done more in 7 weeks than the last government did in 7 years. And these are just the first steps towards the change that people voted for, the change that I'm determined to deliver. But before the election, I also gave a warning. I said change would not happen overnight. When there's a deep rot at the heart of a structure, you can't just cover it up. You can't just tinker or rely on quick fixes. You have to overhaul the entire thing. Tackle it at root, even if it's harder work and takes more time. Because otherwise, what happens? The rot returns in all the same places, and it spreads worse than before. You know that, I know that, and that's why this project has always been about fixing the foundations of our country. But I have to be honest with you, things are worse than we ever imagined. In the first few weeks, we discovered a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. And before anyone says, oh, this is just performative or playing politics, let's remember the OBR did not know about it. They wrote a letter setting that out. And they didn't know because the last government hid it. And even last Wednesday, just last Wednesday, we found out that thanks to the last government's recklessness, we borrowed almost £5 billion more than the OBR expected in the last 3 months alone. That's not performative, that's fact. But as well as the things that we've discovered, we've also seen shocking scenes across the nation. A mindless minority of thugs who thought that they could get away with causing chaos, smashing up communities and terrifying minorities, vandalising and destroying people's property, even trying to set fire to a building with human beings inside it. And as if that wasn't despicable enough, people displaying swastika tattoos, shouting racist slurs on our streets, Nazi salutes at the cenotaph. The cenotaph, the very place we honour those who gave their lives for this country, desecrating their memory under the pretence, and it is a pretence, of legitimate protest. Now they're learning that crime has consequences, that I won't tolerate a breakdown in law and order under any circumstances, and I will not listen to those who exploit grieving families and disrespect local communities. But these riots didn't happen in a vacuum. They exposed the state of our country, revealed a deeply unhealthy society, the cracks in our foundations laid bare, weakened by a decade of division and decline, infected by a spiral of populism which fed off cycles of failure of the last government. Every time they faced a difficult problem, they failed to be honest. They offered the snake oil of populism, which led to more failure, round and round and round, stuck in the rut of the politics of performance. I saw the beginning of that downward spiral firsthand back in 2011, when riots ripped through London and across the country. I was then Director of Public Prosecutions. And when I think back to that time, I see just how far we have fallen. Because responding to those riots was hard. Of course it was. But dealing with the riots this summer was much harder. Back in 2011, I didn't doubt that the courts could do what they needed to do. This time, to be honest with you, I genuinely didn't know. Let me tell you this, every day of that disorder, literally every day, we had to check the precise number of prison places and where those places were to make sure that we could arrest, charge and prosecute people quickly. Not having enough prison places is about as fundamental a failure as you can get. And those people throwing rocks, torching cars, making threats, they didn't just know the system was broken. They were betting on it, gaming it. They thought, they'll never arrest me. And if they do, I won't be prosecuted. And if I am, I won't get much of a sentence. They saw the cracks in our society after 14 years of failure, and they exploited them. That's what we've inherited. Not just an economic black hole, a societal black hole. And that's why we have to take action and do things differently. And part of that is being honest with people about the choices that we face, how tough this will be. And frankly, things will get worse before they get better. I didn't want to release prisoners early. I was chief prosecutor for 5 years. It goes against the grain of everything I've ever done. But to be blunt, if we hadn't taken that difficult decision immediately, we wouldn't have been able to respond to the riots as we did. And if we don't take tough action across the board, we won't be able to fix the foundations of the country as we need. I didn't want to means test the winter fuel payment, but it was a choice that we had to make, a choice to protect the most vulnerable pensioners while doing what is necessary to repair the public finances. Because pensioners also rely on a functioning NHS, good public transport, strong national infrastructure. They want their children to be able to buy homes. They want their grandchildren to get a good education. So we have made that difficult decision to mend the public finances so everyone benefits in the long term, including pensioners. Now, that is a difficult trade-off, and there will be more to come. I won't shy away from making unpopular decisions now if it's the right thing for the country in the long term. That's what a government of service means. This shouldn't be a country where people fear walking down their street, their TVs showing cars and buildings being set on fire. This shouldn't be a country where the Prime Minister can't guarantee prison places. This shouldn't be a country where people are paying thousands more on their mortgages or waiting months for hospital appointments they desperately need, where our waters are filled with sewage, where parents worry that their kids won't get the opportunities that they did, where nothing seems to work anymore. So when I talk about the inheritance the last government left us, the £22 billion black hole in our finances, that isn't about a line on a graph. That's about people's lives, your lives. And the Tories are still not being honest. They know their recklessness cost them the election, but they won't accept the cost that they've inflicted on the country. And they won't apologise for what they've cost you. They're just still thinking about themselves. Now, this government won't always be perfect, but I promise you this, you will be at the heart of it, in the forefront of our minds, at the centre of everything that we do. And that's why I wanted to invite you here today, to show that decent, hard-working people who make up the backbone of this country belong here. This is a government for you. A garden and a building that were once used for lockdown parties. Remember the pictures just over there of the wine and the food? Well, this garden and this building are now back in your service. It's not just that the last government relied on easy gimmicks and bad ideas. Those things happened precisely because the government itself lost its focus on the hopes and ambitions of working people. During those recent riots, I made huge asks of the police and of the criminal justice system. People already stretched to the limit. They knew I was making big asks of them, and I'm not going to apologise for it. But let me tell you this, they delivered. They deserve our gratitude. And that's why I went to Southport, to Lambeth, to Belfast, to thank them personally, to shake the hands of the first responders who rose up to the ask I was making of them. They deserve a government that trusts them, supports them, and works with them. That is the sort of government that we will be. One that works with people, not does things to them. One that believes in hard graft, not gimmicks. Honest about the challenges we face and working tirelessly to fix them. And that is how we will always work. Now, next week, Parliament returns. The business of politics will resume. But it won't be business as usual, because we can't go on like this anymore. Things will have to be done differently. We will do the hard work to root out 14 years of rot, reverse a decade of decline, and fix the foundations. Between now and Christmas, we will carry on as we've started, action, not words. We will introduce legislation and take decisions to protect taxpayers' money, to take on the blockers by accelerating planning to build homes and boost growth. We will forward this autumn to harness the full potential of AI for growth and for the public good. We'll bring rail service into public ownership, putting passengers first. the biggest levelling up of workers' rights in a generation, to give people security, dignity and respect at work. And Great British Energy will be owned by the taxpayer, making money for the taxpayer, producing clean energy and creating good jobs. That is our focus for the rest of the year. But I will be honest with you, there is a budget coming in October, and it's going to be painful. We have no other choice, given the situation that we're in. Those with the broadest shoulders should bear the heavier burden, and that's why we're cracking down on non-DOMs. Those who made the mess should have to do their bit to clean it up, and that's why we're strengthening the powers of the water regulator and backing tough fines on the water companies that have let sewage flood our rivers, lakes and seas. But just as when I responded to the riots, I'll have to turn to the country and make big asks of you as well, to accept short-term pain for long-term good, the difficult trade-off for the genuine solution. And I know that after all that you have been through, that is a really big ask and really difficult to hear. That is not the position we should be in. It's not the position I want to be in. But we have to end the politics of the easy answer that solves nothing. But I also know that we can get through this together. Because the riots didn't just betray the sickness, they also revealed the cure, found not in the cynical conflict of populism, but in the coming together of a country. The people who got together the morning after, all around the country, with their brooms, their shovels, their trowels, and cleared up their community. They reminded us who we really are. I felt real pride in those people who cleaned up our streets, rebuilt the walls, repaired the damage. And I couldn't help thinking about the obvious parallels. Because imagine the pride we will feel as a nation when, after the hard work of clearing up the mess is done, we have a country that we have built together, built to last, that belongs to every single one of us, and all of us have a stake in it. Our hard work rewarded a dozen times over, because we'll have an economy that works for everyone. An NHS not just back on its feet, but fit for the future. Streets that everyone feels safe in. No longer dependent on foreign dictators, because we're producing our own clean energy right here. And giving every child, wherever they come from, whatever their background, the chance to go as far as their talents will take them. I won't lose sight of that prize. I won't lose sight of what we were elected to do. And most importantly, I won't lose sight of the people that we were elected to do it for. You. This is our country. Let's fix it together. Thank you very much.
21 minutes after 10, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Well, you're not really. You're listening to Keir Starmer on LBC, delivering a speech, and now he will take questions from the media.
And I'll start, if I may, with Vicky Young from BBC News. Vicky.
Vicky Young, BBC News. Prime Minister, you say that you want to be open with people, but some will think that you weren't honest during the election campaign about changes to, for example, winter fuel allowance. And many now want to know what the impact of the budget will be. So if you're being honest, can you tell them now what kind of tax rises you're considering?
Well, two or three things Vicky to say about that in the first place. We were being honest about the situation before the election. We set out very clearly what we would be doing with tax rises. I made it clear on numerous occasions that national insurance, VAT and tax would not go up, the triple lock for working people, income tax. And that remains the position. I also set out that our plans were fully funded and fully costed. What I did not expect was a £22 billion black hole. And I know the Tories say that's performative. If it's performative, why didn't the OBR know about it? Look at that figure of 5 billion last week in 3 months. If that's performative, why didn't the OBR know about it? These are basic questions about what we have inherited. As I've just said, I didn't want to have to deal with the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. But we have to fix the NHS. We have to fix our homes, our schools. And pensioners rely on them in the same way as everybody else does. So I'm not going to preempt the budget, but I'm absolutely not going to accept that the inheritance that we have isn't anything other than dire, a £22 billion black hole. And I'll just add to that what I said about the prisons, because I obviously feel very strongly about this. To have to gauge every day of those disorders, when people are trying to burn down hotels, I'm having to look at lists of prison places and where we've got them because of the mess that we were left. That's disgraceful. No Prime Minister should ever be in that position when trying to deal with disorder. That's what we inherited. That's what we will fix. Thank you, Vicky. Anushka, please.
Thank you. Anushka Rastana, ITV News. Prime Minister, you talk about choices, and there are plenty of things you've chosen to spend money on. You've chosen to give bumper pay rises to doctors, higher than for nurses and teachers, and you've chosen to take these benefits off pensioners. Age UK say 2 million will be pushed into hardship as a result. So what do you say to those pensioners who are not well off, who feel that you are choosing to balance the books on their backs?
Well, so far as the winter fuel allowance is concerned, firstly, I would say it's not a particularly well-designed scheme, frankly, and I think everybody would concede that. I do think it's important that we make sure that the support is there for those pensioners who need it most, which is why we're pushing for the pension credit to be taken up and looking at other allowances. But equally, simply allowing national strikes to go on and on and on and not resolving them was costing the country a fortune. You can't build the economy, you can't grow the economy if you haven't got a basic transport system that's working. You can't grow the economy if people can't get back to work because they can't get the operations that they need. And we've got to get the economy going. And so that is why we've made the decisions that we have made. And on the pay review bodies, more broadly, it doesn't cover all of the disputes that we've had to deal with. What we know is the last government didn't set a framework for that when they started down the road of the pay review. And they put at least one of them in the cupboard of the buildings over the road and ran away from it. We can't carry on like that. We've got to make difficult choices. Thank you, Anushka. I've got Emily from Channel 4.
Emily with the Channel 4 News. Prime Minister, on prisons, what guarantee can you give to the public that no prisoner who is let out early will go on to harm anyone? Or is the truth that you can't guarantee that and that the early release scheme carries with it an undeniable risk?
Well, look, the first thing is, obviously we put in place a framework to ensure that we don't release those who create the greatest risk. That's a basic safeguard that we've had to put in. But I'm not pretending for 1 minute this is a decision I want to make. I spent 5 years prosecuting people and putting them in prison. The idea of releasing people who should be in prison because the prisons are too full and we don't have the places goes against everything I've worked for years. But we've got to face facts. They haven't built the prisons, the last government. They've pretended that you could have longer and longer sentences, send more people to prison, at the same time that you could veto or choose not to have a prison built near you. They were false choices, and here we are, without the prison places that we need. So, what are the options available to an incoming government? Let the prisons get so overcrowded that we can't arrest people and put them before our courts? Would that have worked in the disorder? I don't think so. I was really clear in my mind that one of the main ways in which we're going to have to deal with the disorder was making sure those who were throwing rocks, setting fire to buildings on a Saturday or Sunday were facing the full face of the law within days. I had to create the conditions for that, because the alternative, you would be putting a question to me saying, how come all these people in disorder didn't even get arrested, have not been put before the courts and can't be sentenced? because we haven't got any places. This is not a decision that I wanted to take. It's not a decision that any Prime Minister would want to take. And I can't tell you how shocked I was when I discovered the full extent of what they've done with our prisons. And it's going to take time to fix it. I can't build a prison by Saturday. We will fix it. We've already taken the measures that are necessary to make sure we can get through the disorder. But I shouldn't be sitting in the Cobra room with a list of prison places across the country on a day-by-day basis, trying to work out how we deal with disorder. But that's the position I was put in, and it's frankly not good enough. Thank you, Emily. Beth.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Beth Rigby, Sky News. Prime Minister, you say you want to build trust and be honest with people. You've got off to a bad start with pensioners who voted for you, and then you cut their winter fuel allowance, and it wasn't in your manifesto. You also said in the general election you had no plans to raise taxes beyond what you'd set out in your manifesto. Now you're saying something else. So can you please level with people? Are you going to raise taxes? And are you looking, when you talk about the broader shoulders, are you looking at taxes on working people? Or are you now looking at a range of wealth taxes on shareholders, homeowners, big business? Thank you.
But as I said in the campaign, in relation to working people, income tax, VAT, national insurance, we will not increase tax. I was clear before the election, I'll be clear again after the election. Obviously, the budget is in a number of weeks and the detail will be set out there. But I say again what I said before the election, which is we have to get away from this idea that the only levers that can be pulled are more taxes or more spending. Our number one mission is to grow the economy, to make sure that we are creating the money in the first place. That remains the number one mission. Nothing knocks that mission. And that's why it's really important we have a transport system that works. That's why it's really important we have an NHS capable of getting through the backlog. That's why it's important we have the National Wealth Fund, Great British Energy, that we unlock planning so that we can get on. All of those decisions are decisions we've taken in the first 7 weeks to make sure we get the economy where we need it. But we're going to have to take tough decisions. I did not cater for a £22 billion black hole. And that's because it wasn't on the ABR's books. We were looking at the available, as you were, the available material. But it wasn't there. The OBR didn't know about it. That's why they're conducting a review, is to find out why they didn't know about it. But £22 billion black hole on top of what we knew to be the situation is a problem that I'm not just going to pretend isn't there or that we can easily fix. We're going to have to fix it. We're going to have to fix it quickly, because I genuinely do not think that the politics where we simply pretend things can be done that can't be done is working. And we will do it straight away. That's why I call about sort of getting the rot out now. Because if we don't do it, if we paper over it, we know what's going to happen. It's like the damp or whatever. Anybody who's ever decorated a house knows how this works. Pretend it isn't there, paper over it, and guess what? In a year's time, it's 10 times worse. We're not going to do it that way. Thank you, Beth. I'm going to take Andy Bell, if only, so that, where is Andy? Andy, if only, so I could say personally into your face, well, fantastic on your daughter's achievement in the Olympics. Georgia was absolutely brilliant. We were all glued to our sets, and please convey our congratulations to her, as I know many people already have. Andy.
Thank you. Well, I wasn't quite expecting that, but thank you very much for that message. Prime Minister, you talk about getting the rot out. Your administration's already been criticised for making a lot of appointments, political appointments, inside the civil service, inside what should be strictly non-political appointments. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have a review now by your Commissioner for Ministerial Standards, just to set the record straight, to clear the air? Because at the moment, a lot of people are wondering whether you really are getting the rot out in terms of the way public administration works.
Well, look, Andy, most of these allegations and accusations are coming from the very people that dragged our country down in the first place. So you'll forgive me if I take that approach to it. We are going to fix the foundations. We've got to do it at speed, and I'm determined to have the right people in the right places to allow us to get on with that job. I'm enormously aware of how big a task this is and how we have to move at pace. And that's why we're getting the best people into the best jobs. But I'm not really going to take lectures on this from the people who dragged our country so far down in the last few years. Thank you. I've got Kieran from The Guardian.
Thank you. Kieran Stacey from The Guardian. Just on that theme, can you tell us why you've cancelled the appointment of your new National Security Advisor? And can you pledge that there will be an open and transparent process to replace that person?
Yes, of course there'll be an open and transparent process. And no, I'm not going to publicly discuss individual appointments. Thank you. Jack from The Sun.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Jack Alston from The Sun. You've made clear today your reasoning for giving big pay rises to public sector workers, but now you've shown you're willing to get your chequebook out. Do you not risk spending the rest of your premiership playing a game of whack-a-mole with ever-growing union demands? And just quickly, you spent a lot of time today looking back in anger, but are you happy that Oasis has decided to reform on your watch?
What can I say in relation to that? It's very, very good. It's a great song. I'm not sure I'm the best place to champion it after the last 20 or 30 minutes. But look, let's see what happens with Oasis. In relation to the pay settlement, look, we were very clear before the election we weren't going to meet the demands of the unions. They were making demands which we did not think could be met, and we haven't met them. We'll take the same tough approach as we go forward in relation to any pay issues. We have to take that approach. And therefore, I will be as tough on this as I was before the election, because we have to be tough about it. But I'm not going to pretend that having hospitals that can't operate properly is good for the economy, or having a transport system where people can't get to work is good for the economy. Just sitting it out year after year was costing a huge amount of money. So the government has to get the balance right. But let me be clear, I'm going to be really tough about this with the unions, as I'm being tough with everybody else, because this is part of the work we have to do to get out the rot and start to rebuild our country. Thank you. I've got Chris from The Times.
Thank you, Chris Smythe from The Times. Just to follow up Andy's question about the widespread concern of people with Labour links being appointed to the civil service, was your answer effectively that process doesn't really matter when the task is so urgent? And if you are talking about honesty and service, can you not just explain why you appointed some of these people, why Lord Ali, for example, had downstreet past what he was doing here? And again, on Beth's theme, you said clearly wealth taxes are in the frame. Are you also saying to people that further spending cuts are also being looked at?
Well, let me be clear. I wasn't saying process doesn't matter. I think you and others have heard enough from me over the years to know that process does matter to me. Procedures do matter to me. And I'm absolutely determined to restore honesty and integrity to government, because I think that is core to ensuring that people appreciate that politics can be a force for good. I think one of the reasons people have been disillusioned, disaffected, if you like, in recent years is because they can't see politics as a force for good. So that process and procedure and doing things properly matters to me beyond the fact that it, as it were, should be done properly. I think it's core to politics. So I didn't mean that. And look, if you take Lord Ali, he's a long-term donor and contributor to the Labour Party. He was doing some transition work with us. He had a pass for a short-term time to do that work. The work finished, and he hasn't got a pass. You know, that's the state of affairs. And the second bit of your question, I'm so sorry. Well, look, I mean, try as you might, I'm not going to preempt the Chancellor in relation to the budget. I am indicating there are going to have to be tough choices. Obviously, we made commitments in relation to tax on working people in the election, which we intend to honour. And I frankly don't want to have to take the tough decisions that we're going to have to take, but I'm not going to shy away. I genuinely think one of the problems in politics has been people standing at podium like this, pretending that hard choices don't need to be made, or pretending or knocking things down the road. We've seen, I don't know how much, just knocked down the road, the other side of the election, get it somewhere else, don't take the decision. It's what happened with prisons. The decision should have been taken a long time ago. But each month it was just knocked another month, another month, another month, hoping somebody else would pick up the mess. We can't go on like that, so we're going to have to grip it, and I want to grip it early. And that's why I said in my speech, if we have to make unpopular decisions now, in the short term, to make sure the long term we can actually do the change that we want to do. The 5 missions in terms of rebuilding this country are really important to me. But I know I'm not going to be able to do them if I don't clear out the rot first and take those tough decisions. Thank you. I've got Daniel from The Telegraph.
Hello, Daniel Martin from The Telegraph. How can you justify strike agreements with the unions when there's no it doesn't include any agreement to increase productivity? And secondly, on Ukraine, do you believe that Ukraine has the right to use Storm Shadow in Russia?
Let me deal with both aspects of that. Look, we came to settlements on the pay disputes, which I think people would say were fair. The rate, what was asked was not what was given. There was clear negotiation in those discussions. And as I say, we can't pretend that strikes, which would be going on a long time, are doing anything other than holding our country back and costing us a future. There's no neutral cost to this. In relation to Ukraine, as I've said many times, the position of this government is no different to the position of the last government. No new decisions or different decisions have been taken. We have put additional resource in terms of what we're providing, both money commitments and weapons commitments. I'm not pretending the last government wouldn't have done that, by the way, because I genuinely think one of the good things about recent years in relation to Ukraine, and there's not much good that can be said of it, is that there's been a unity in Parliament on that. And as I've said to President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine, we will stand with them for as long as it takes. I'm not going to get into tactical questions about the use of weapons for reasons that I know you'll understand. David from the Mirror.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Dave Boak from the Daily Mirror. Prime Minister, on the subject of hard choices, will safe and legal routes be extended on your watch, and do you think this can play a role in stopping the boats?
Well, so far as stopping the boats is concerned, we have got to take down the gangs that are running the vile trade in the first place, which is why we're setting up the Border Security Command. It's why when we had the European Political Community meeting just 2 weeks after I was elected, and we had 46 European leaders to Blenheim, I discussed with them in some detail how we would work better together to take down the gangs that are running this vile trade in the first place. I'm absolutely clear in my own mind that that's how it will be most effectively done. Just as in the recent riots, I drew on my experience of 2011 in terms of what worked to deal with the riots. So with the gangs that are running this vile trade, drawing on my experience of having taken down terrorism gangs, those that smuggled guns and drugs, I think that the same can be done with those that are running this vile trade. Thank you. And then Lucy from the FT.
Thank you, Lucy Fisher. Prime Minister, you've spoken today about restoring honesty and integrity to government, and in your manifesto you pledged to establish a new independent ethics and integrity commission with its own independent chair. You've been in Downing Street for more than 50 days now. Can you commit to telling us when you're going to launch this commission? And can you confirm today that the chair will have the power to launch their own probes autonomously, and that they will be able to publish independent verdicts from those probes? Thank you.
Well, Lucy, look, that is a commitment that we made. We will stick to it. I don't have a precise date. I do think it's important that it can initiate its own inquiries, if you like, because that has been an inhibitor in the past. So that commitment stands. As soon as we've got a date, I'll give you a date. But I am very keen that it has the ability to start investigations under its own steam, because I think that's one of the bits that's been missing. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
The time is 10:41. A brief hiatus, and then we'll return to discuss what we've just heard together. Time is 10:44. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where Keir Starmer has just, well, not here, he did it in the Rose Garden at 10 Downing Street, but you've just heard it on LBC. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, delivering a speech about what could be loosely described as the state of the nation. Mr P is on the case already. 39 minutes of Starmer, James. I'm impressed with the speech. I suppose he was left with no choice considering the situation and the usual suspects slinging mud at him. Meanwhile, James sits with his feet up, eating biscuits. That's outrageous. I was eating pineapple chunks, as it happens, but I'm not anymore. I'm poised to take your calls. I don't know if you remember Rishi Sunak's opening speech when we talked on the programme for about an hour and a half about the importance of optimism in politics and the possibility of the grown-ups having returned to the room. In retrospect, it was an incredibly naive, not to mention ridiculous perspective to take, and he almost immediately gave the lie to any hope that he was about to embark upon a different course by bringing Suella Braverman back into the cabinet, a woman whose name became a byword for everything, really, that was wrong with the last several administrations. And I'm reminding you of that because I am slightly conscious of what we could call idiot's corner. I wanted Rishi Sunak to be good because I'm a patriotic resident of this country, and by patriotic I simply mean I want what's best for myself, my family and my fellow citizens. So I remind you of that because I feel like that again today, even though Keir Starmer is from a very different political party, from the most different political party. And I feel like the grown-ups have returned to the room. I've wondered for some time what would happen if a Prime Minister used a public address to talk the country through what was happening and what was needed. The difference between fixing the foundations as a slogan on the front of a podium, a lectern, and stop the boats could not be more acute. I fully appreciate many people are concerned about stopping the boats, but the idea that that would be the overarching mission of a government that has responsibility for our health, for our education, for our defence, for our environment, for farming, for trade, for business. The idea that the overarching obsession, the key mission, the defining statement of an entire government could be stop the boats was a moment of epic national tragedy, I felt, and spoke to precisely the points that Keir Starmer has just been making. It spoke to an addiction to making promises that couldn't be kept, or to thinking that you could solve complicated problems with simple pledges. He said, I think the line I enjoyed the most, we have to end the politics of the easy answer that solves nothing. And he provided the detail. He referenced the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, and the quite correct claim that the £22 billion hole in the public finances was not expected. There's some dispute over how much was expected. The Institute of Fiscal Studies had essentially warned that there could be a shortfall of between 10 and 20 billion pounds. But if you take their lowest prediction, that's 12 billion pounds more that they have to find, that they were charged with finding the minute that they got into Downing Street. And he set out some of the ways in which he intends to do it. Let me read you some of the texts that have come in while he was speaking. I'll just read them randomly. Is it just me, James, or do you struggle to take seriously any of the Tory protests about standards in Number 10, the economy, tax, honesty? The barefaced hypocrisy is extraordinary. I thought he handled that very well. I haven't really followed the Wahid Ali story, the TV and business executive who was a fundraiser for the Labour Party and had a pass into Downing Street last month while he was also, I think, organising a party for other fundraisers. So as far as I could tell, everyone's getting their knickers in the twist about the fact that he had access to the barbecue in the Downing Street garden. And the people telling you to get your knickers in the twist were the ones that were supremely relaxed about Boris Johnson putting the son of a KGB spy, now sanctioned in many countries, the father, the spy, into the actual House of Lords. So I think that's what Alan is referring to. Loz says, this is the sort of candour that will win people over. If he wants us to believe again, he needs to keep this energy going. Brilliant speech, giving me some hope. That's Paul in Crowborough. Ian says, I'm loving this. This one is unsigned. This man needs someone to advise him to stop pouring fuel on the fire. Utterly inept, referring, I presume, to the rioters and the idea that we should be somehow seeking to appease racist thugs trying to burn down hotels and attack our police officers. VM similarly unimpressed by elements of it, although perhaps a little more intelligently. Utter rubbish that rioters were exploiting and gaming the Tories' failed system. That would credit them with joined-up thinking and critical thinking skills that they don't have. They rioted because they're a bunch of thugs who'd been whipped up by 10 years of Tory divisive rhetoric and a host of right-wing media shock jocks and social media extremists. It's something I would largely agree with, although I'd also remind you that what he said about prisons, what he repeatedly said about prisons, probably lies at the heart of what you might describe as his political mission. Ian Dunt puts it well on social media this morning. A situation, think about this, take this on board, a situation where the Prime Minister is having to check prison places daily during riots is symptomatic of an utterly broken country. The sheer scale of his inheritance, the damage that Keir Starmer has inherited is something that you obviously know a lot about because we talked about it throughout. But the sleight of hand, the pulling of wool over the eyes that the entire leadership election panel remain dedicated to is really a reiteration of the idea that you look at a country where a government has responsibility for defence, for health, for education, for the environment, for farming, for business, for trade. What else can we put on that list? There'll be things I've forgotten that you're cross about. All of the things that a government has responsibility for, and the current iteration of the Tory party, because they live in perpetual fear of parties growing up to the right of them. They think the single most important priority in the country is stopping the boats. So there it is. That is why we've ended up in a place where the actual Prime Minister is having to check prison places on a daily basis during vicious riots in order to be confident that he can actually, or that the people pleading guilty to these hideous crimes because they were too stupid to realise that filming themselves committing them might be a rather compelling case for the prosecution to make sure that there is actually room to lock them up. I'm captivated by this speech, says Kevin. Starmer has such a tough gig, but I sincerely trust that he can turn this tanker full of skip-fires away from the cliffs. A master of the analogy there, Kevin, a man after my own heart. It's the first time in a long time that I've heard a cogent plan and believed it. If Sunak, Johnson and the rest were the e-scooters of government, Starmer is the Austin Metro. I think maybe just doubling down on the king. He's a mastery of analogies, and he's clearly worked on his delivery too. Sue's not sure. She says, listening to Keir Starmer, I'm sure he will do good, but it's so boring, all doom and gloom and little hope, unlike Kamala Harris in the United States. Although, Sue, I have to tell you, she's being criticised for a lack of substance. And, of course, she's not in power. You can campaign in poetry, but you have to govern in prose. And in many ways, you're complaining that Keir Starmer today was communicating to you in prose and not poetry. Call me naive, says Jennifer in Stilton, but this is for the first time in a very long time. I believe and feel trust in our Prime Minister. Jamie says that was actually quite good, very scathing of the failures of the Tories. And Eric goes further. After listening to the Prime Minister's speech, whatever he needs to fix the country, I will stand behind him. I need to find a few more negative ones, but they have to be vaguely sensible. They can't be, as Mr. P described, the usual suspects queuing up to sling mud at him. Because I am allowing myself this morning to be optimistic. And I am conscious that the hope of improvement will have to endure and contain things getting worse before they get better, as the song didn't say. It's never going to catch on, is it? Oasis might be getting back together, but this is not 1997. Things can only get worse before they get better. And that, I realise, was the speech I've been waiting, I think, over 10 years for a British Prime Minister to deliver. And I just remind you again, before you waste tuppence accusing me of footballification or client journalism or all the other things that we used to point out happening when the various lies and atrocities were being committed on the country by the last several governments. I said the same thing for about an hour and a half about Rishi Sunak. And I have in the past been more than happy to castigate leaders of the Labour Party. I am responding entirely to one man, one speech, one government and one vision. And I really, really like what I see. And I can't articulate to you how weird that feels. I can't articulate to you how scared I am even to say those words out loud. How many times have we referenced that brilliant line in the film, the John Cleese film Clockwise, about it being the hope that gets you? I can cope with the despair. I can cope with the despair. It's the hope that gets you. And there hasn't been any hope. You've got people prominent on the political stage dedicated to breaking things. The equivalent, if you like, of the Farage rioters, the people who have gone from setting fire to our membership of the European Union and now want to set fire to our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights to bring us down to the level of Russia and Belarus. And we have had government after government after government who were dedicating all of their energies to appeasing people like that. Keir Starmer barely acknowledged their existence today because he was busy talking about apprentices. And he was busy talking about firefighters and police officers and doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals and you and me and people that actually want to be governed. who don't wake up every morning gnashing their teeth about the possibility of some desperate soul launching a dinghy from Calais in the hope of arriving in Dover and almost certainly, according to all statistical evidence, having an asylum application that is entirely justified. He talked about fixing the foundations. He talked about unpopular decisions. He talked about building 1.5 million new homes. He talked about ending strikes that had crippled the country for years. He talked about setting up Great British Energy. He talked about having done more in 7 weeks than 7 years. And I felt with every sentence, with every paragraph, I felt a little bit of my determination to come back from the speech cynically and sceptically and throwing rotten tomatoes at the Prime Minister. I felt it seeping away. I don't like the winter fuel decision. I don't like means testing in general. I don't like it in particular if, as is predicted, it's going to hurt some of the more vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable people in our society. But I'm not taking lectures on how bad a policy it is from the people who presided over an economy that necessitated the invention of warm banks. The idea that anybody involved in the last several governments has any leg, any limb to stand on when it comes to criticising Keir Starmer for choosing people he believes are best capable of absorbing the financial penalty of losing a benefit it's palpably absurd. I thought the questions from the media were really interesting. They weren't quite sure where to go because it was as if a headmaster had delivered a speech about school curriculum policies, and therefore they can only really ask questions about school curriculum policies. They can't ask stupid questions about the latest populist snake oil that's being set up by various politicians who were more concerned with their own leadership ambitions than they were with the actual state of the nation. And that's the phrase we keep coming back to. The state of the nation. I wrote a book called How They Broke Britain, right? I wrote, and you know, it details, in some cases forensically, a lot of the reasons behind and causes of the malaise that Keir Starmer describes. It doesn't go in hard on prisons, but it looks at how austerity combined with populism, combined with utterly inadequate politicians up to and including the status, the position of Prime Minister, all congregated in the same space to create a country that was surreally divided between those of us who could see what was going on, those of us who have been supremely unsurprised to discover that the prisons are utterly unfit for purpose, and those who've been insisting for years that everything's absolutely brilliant and Boris Johnson is the finest Prime Minister this country has ever seen, or that Liz Truss was more sinned against than sinning. And although he rightly laid out the charges against his predecessors, laid out the charges against the Tories, that was a speech from a Prime Minister who's got 4 or 5 years ahead of him to at least begin to do the things that he is promising to do. It was not a speech from a Prime Minister who's worried about an attack from his own front bench, who's worried about a leadership challenge or demands from a congregation of backbenchers that you hit the road sooner rather than later. That was a boring speech by a boring man dealing with the boring business of getting Britain back on its feet. And if you don't like that, you don't like Britain. If you don't want him to succeed, you don't want Britain to succeed. You can't possibly argue with the diagnosis of a country on its knees. You can argue with the prescription, such that he has provided, and we'll have to wait until the budget to find out more, but you cannot argue with the diagnosis of a country on its knees unless you are truly deluded or incredibly wealthy. Unless you are so insulated from the realities of what's happening in the NHS, what's happening in the education system, what's happening in trade. There's stuff he didn't say that I would have liked to have seen. You can tell Keith thinks I've gone on a bit because he just turned up the music in the background. I would have liked a little more on Brexit. I don't understand how you can talk about a £22 billion deficit without acknowledging the role that Brexit has played in robbing our businesses of the opportunity to trade easily with many of our partners. But I wasn't sure what I was going to do this morning. I wasn't sure what he was going to say, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to allow my natural cynicism to overcome my natural optimism. I'm not. I think that was absolutely marvellous. And it is a very, very long time since I have felt that we have someone in the driving seat of this country who actually has a bloody licence. It's 3 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where our political editor, Natasha Clark, will join us shortly, having hot-footed it back from Westminster, where she was cruelly denied the opportunity to ask a question, actually, but at least there were no nods or sops to these weird new television stations with no viewers that have grown up over the last few years, but an extraordinary number of very right-wing politicians on their payroll. Perish the thought that such a thing could ever happen here. Either shortly before or shortly after Natasha talks us through what she has enjoyed this morning, we will start taking your calls. So what are you going to say? What am I going to ask you? I'm going to ask you what you thought of that speech in the first instance. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I'm also going to ask you about your relationship with optimism, about how it sounds to you to suggest that we need to give this guy a chance. If he, in the highly unlikely event that he turns out to be as bad as any of the previous 3, 4 or 5 prime ministers, we will need to come down on him like a ton of bricks with the added misery, the added horror of feeling let down, as opposed to merely having our fears and our cynicism confirmed. But that relationship with optimism, in many ways, I want to ask you, how bad do you think it really is? How much of Keir Starmer's diagnosis do you buy? The idea that the country is in a truly parlous state. I buy almost all of it, but I could be wrong. He could be wrong. He says he's not being performative. He says he's not politicking, but in a way, politicians are always politicking. So what did you make of that speech? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Also, what are the chances? This is what I really want to know. And in some ways, this is where I may have to throw a couple of eyes towards Idiot's Corner on my inbox. And by that, I mean people that will never be part of a process of unity and progress. How feasible is it? How possible is it that he can, with the exclusion of the kind of people either drawn to or sympathetic to the race riots that we saw on our streets earlier this month, with the exclusion and exception of them and their friends in the media and in Westminster, how likely is it that he can assemble enough sort of public support for a program of it's going to get worse before it gets better in the current climate? For a start, I would argue if you're on social media, if on Elon Musk's platform, it's probably going to be impossible to recognize the world that he described because it is increasingly subsumed in a swamp of lies promoted up to and including the man who owns the platform, and sort of appalling race baiting, appalling racism. So the idea that he should not be prioritizing essentially racist policies over policies that will improve our lives is something that isn't going to land in the darkest sewers of social media, but is it going to land with you? Is it? Do you think he can pull it off? 0345 6060 973. He's in now for 5 years maximum, 4 years, 4 to 5 years. By the time of the next general election, do you think Keir Starmer can feasibly do enough to earn the second round, if you like, of government? And that concludes the optimism and the support from me, because I want you now to start popping Keir Starmer's balloons. I want you to pick holes in what you've heard. I want you to tell me why you don't rate him based on what we have heard this morning and what we have seen so far. I'm not going to lie to you. I find the idea of someone preferring Boris Johnson or Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak to what we just witnessed almost impossible to credit. I find it almost impossible to comprehend how you could be more uplifted, more enthusiastic, more supportive, if you like, of programs that were almost entirely bogus or divisive or snake oil, built on snake oil, than somebody simply saying, I've got a really tough job to do and I'm going to do my best to do it, and not seeking to blame everything on people in the most vulnerable corners of our various communities. So I feel free to start lobbing your rotten tomatoes at what you just heard from the Prime Minister. The time is 7 minutes after 11. And if you ring in now, you can book your place, and I'll start taking your calls after we've spoken to Natasha Clark. What did you think of that? Well, not just the content, but also the principle, the precedent of a Prime Minister taking the decision to stand in the Rose Garden and talk directly to you about the challenges that he faced and what he was intending to do about them. I want your kind of state of the government speech in response to Keir Starmer's State of the Nation speech. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Response coming into the studio, mostly positive. Brilliant speech, says Ruth. I understand it's going to be tough, but it's a huge relief that we are being treated like adults and being informed instead of like toddlers being appeased. That's a brilliant line. That's pretty close to what I feel this morning. And Kevin says, I wish Starmer had said something like, the citizens of this country have been lied to, misinformed and mistreated for too long. I am telling you the truth, and this is what it feels like. And yes, sometimes it is tough to hear. I'm not going to lie to you, Kevin. I thought that is what he said, to be honest with you. I think that's exactly where he went. And Wendy adds, what a breath of fresh air Keir Starmer is. The adults are back in the room. Tracy said, I expected it to be sobering. I expected to feel frightened and a bit angry, primarily because of the withdrawal of winter fuel payments. And I am still angry about that, if I'm honest. But I felt a little bit uplifted. I really trust this man, and I don't expect him to let us down. I voted Lib Dem in the general election, but he has my faith, and I have his back. James says, give me a boring Prime Minister any day over a performative clown show that was the last few governments. It's great to see the adults back in charge. And that was the best speech I've heard from Keir Starmer ever. I don't know how high praise that is, given the previous performances from the government now, from the Prime Minister. I nearly said the leader of the Labour Party, but there it is. So obviously there are people who are furious that he hasn't rebuilt Jerusalem in his first 2 weeks or 2 months in the job. But the general feeling is, from people responding to what they heard this morning, as opposed to simply reiterating what they have been saying and thinking, if that's a correct word to use, for the last 20 years, the general feeling is that that went pretty well. In fact, Mark is already confident enough to start making jokes. Good morning, James. I'm afraid I can't take Keir Starmer seriously because he didn't deliver his speech while hiding in a fridge. It's an amateur's mistake. Linda says, I'm encouraged by listening to Keir Starmer. When we had the Conservatives in power, I felt we were in an abyss. The country was going down. I felt like it was broken and we were a laughing stock all over the world. So I feel energised. Fingers crossed that he can lift the country up. And that brings us back to the question we will concern ourselves with moving forward. Do you think he can? Do you think he can? So a little bit of analysis of what we've just heard, and we'll start that with Natasha shortly. And then looking at the road ahead as opposed to the rearview mirror, do you think he can? Do you think Keir Starmer is up to the job that he has set himself? Are you absolutely out of puff, Natasha Clark?
I don't know. What do you think?
Did you run all the way from Downing Street to Leicester Square?
Not all the way,
it's a fair old
but a lot of the way.
Do you have a Fitbit?
I don't. I really should put one on because I just think the amount of time I spend running up and down Downing Street, I should put that on Strava.
You won't have heard much of the analysis, much of the response coming into the programme, but you just heard me reading through a random selection of texts coming in. I don't remember, and it's a while since, we had Clegg and Cameron in the Rose Garden, but that was more of a burgeoning bromance than a mission statement, a mission ahead. The key thing that struck me was the words on the lectern, fixing the foundations, replacing stop the boats. And the second thing that struck me was the conduct of your colleagues, the questions, which had to be, as a consequence of the content of the speech, had to be quite substantive. There wasn't the front page hunting that has typified these sort of moments for the last few years. The journalists, whether they were supportive of the government or not, trying to get a gotcha or trying to get a scoop. So it was an oddly sober affair, I felt.
I think that's fair. Look, it's his first, obviously, speech back in Downing Street as he tries to sort of mark the new year in government. We're expecting MPs back in Westminster next week. So it is trying to set up, I think, for him, the scale of the challenge ahead. That was very clear. And obviously, what he really wanted to talk about was what this means in terms of the legacy of the last government and how high he believes that challenge is going to be to get rid of what he believes would be 14 years of Conservative rot.
When there's a deep rot at the heart of a structure, you can't just cover it up. You can't just tinker or rely on quick fixes. You have to overhaul the entire thing. Tackle it at root, even if it's harder work and takes more time. Because otherwise, what happens? The rot returns in all the same places, and it spreads worse than before.
In fairness, James, I think it actually reminded me in some ways of some of the things that I think Rishi Sunak tried to say at the start of when he became Prime Minister, obviously overtaken by events. But
in the reappointment of Suella Braverman 2 or 3 hours later, which gave knocked the gloss off all of his promises of change. But yes, I said that oddly at the outset.
What I mean by that is, Rishi Sunak talking about making the difficult long-term decisions for the future because they're the right decisions. That's what Keir Starmer, I think, was trying to do with his speech, talking about how the government will do that hard work. And obviously he talked about the riots and made that a huge metaphor of this speech, talking about the idea of the clear up being a clear part of what the solution is going to be.
Would we have had the speech without the riots?
I think potentially, yes, but maybe it wouldn't have framed the speech in quite the way that I think it did. But yes, I think the riots was obviously that metaphor. He wants to try and clean up the country, and he believes that it's going to take quite a long time to do that.
We've also seen shocking scenes across the nation. A mindless minority of thugs who thought that they could get away with causing chaos, smashing up communities and terrifying minorities, vandalising and destroying people's property, even trying to set fire to a building with human beings inside it. And as if that wasn't despicable enough, people displaying swastika tattoos, shouting racist slurs on our streets, Nazi salutes at the cenotaph. The cenotaph, the very place we honour those who gave their lives for this country, desecrating their memory under the pretence, and it is a pretence, of legitimate protest. Now they're learning that crime has consequences, that I won't tolerate a breakdown in law and order under any circumstances.
That was a pretty interesting line from Keir Starmer, wasn't it? Obviously, you would expect the former director of public prosecution to say something like that, but it's clear that law and order and crime is going to be a really big part of now his tenure in Downing Street, and potentially, not saying it wasn't important before, but the summer of unrest has made that something that needs to be at the forefront of his mind. But I think that the stark headlines that we're going to see in tomorrow's papers, James, are going to be all about the budget, isn't it? About those painful decisions that he says are going to have to come down the track. And he's talking about how those with the broadest shoulders need to bear that burden, talking about the winter fuel allowance, which we know he's going to scrap for millions of pensioners as well, saying that's the thing that he needs to do if he needs to make those political choices to put more money into the NHS, to schools, to give kids the life chances that he says they need. He's going to have to take some of those difficult decisions to take money away from pensioners. And, he was quizzed on the idea that he is making political choices at the moment. And I think when MPs come back next week, we will see a little bit more from MPs about how they really feel about some of these political choices. The idea of giving, some people say, bigger pay rises to some of the unions. Some
of the workers.
Sure, but also giving doctors different pay rises to train drivers, and he's making those political choices. And I think a lot of people are going to have something to say about that, and have something to say about the idea, whether you agree with it or not, about taking money off pensioners, to give pay rises, to put money into other areas, to put VAT on private school fees, all of those things. Those are the choices he's going to have to make.
That's the ankle, isn't it? Whether it's an Achilles heel or not, time will tell. But it was interesting how many of the questions went in on that. And I've heard people who know what they're talking about contending that there's a U-turn on the way, I think he probably gave the lie to that prospect, at least in the short to middle term.
Well, he did say that he is going to be looking at ways to, I can't remember what the phrase was, it's something like mitigate the impacts of the winter fuel allowance. And I spoke to somebody in government today who, there is a report in the Financial Times today that says they could be extending what's called the Household Support Budget Fund. That, I'm told by government sources, is being considered. So there could be some mitigating impacts to try and soften the blow a bit. But the Prime Minister said mitigations. So that's going to get all of us looking at what else could potentially be done. There was an idea that they could potentially stagger some of those payments in order to give it a little bit of a taper, to give it off, to try and...
Which is always the sort of holy grail when you're doing means testing.
Exactly.
The taper is sadly often more expensive than the money that it would redistribute. And that's the point, isn't it? I mean, that's a political decision that many of his own members, many of his own MPs won't like. But
and Number 10 are very aware and I think alive to that. There are definitely people in government who are worried that this could be something that they could have to move on.
It's still politics, as we haven't seen for a long time. It's not a slogan. It's a deliberate attempt to take money from this constituency of people and put it there instead, because the finances are not infinite. It's not rhetoric. It's not sloganeering. It's the politics of detail, and that's, I think, what I found refreshing about the entire speech. And of course, as many of my texters are pointing out, pensioners are going to be treated by the doctors who have just received a sort of morale-boosting pay rise.
You know, he wanted to make that case, didn't he? He wanted to sit there and say, actually, look, this is the political choices, but pensioners use all of these public services too, and they are all vital to our future. So yes, but I think, you know, the honeymoon for Keir Starmer is going to come to an end, I think, in the next few weeks, in terms of his own MPs starting to pile a little bit more pressure on some of these decisions that he's making.
Splendid, thank you. Why didn't you get a question? Who do I write to?
You can write to Downing Street. I've been promised one at the next one.
Have you?
Yes.
Good. I'll make it a good one. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, who, if I hadn't very unprofessionally revealed it, you never would have known had a heart rate approaching the apocalyptic, having sprinted like Georgia Bell. That was a lovely moment, wasn't it?
That was really nice.
That was very
actually.
human.
That was quite sweet.
That was very human.
He was trying to soften him up to ask him,
I know,
to ask him a lovely question,
Bell wasn't
but it
having
didn't work, did it?
he went straight in with his studs up. Right, your reactions to this. Yeah, and listen, I'm in the interests not only of balance, but also of engaging radio. I am actively and enthusiastically encouraging you to ring in and call me an idiot. Not literally, that would be a little bit unpleasant for a Tuesday morning, but why that was not a speech that speaks, at least for now, to the possibility of maturity, intelligence, Hey, you know what it was, don't you? You know what that speech had, right? You know that, yeah? Integrity, professionalism, and accountability. The problem is, you remember what happened last time we heard those words. It is 22 minutes after 11, and it is a morning for cautious optimism. At least it is in my mind. What is it in yours? Andreas is in Oxford. Andreas, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. I think, cautious optimism is definitely the right word. I mean, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm definitely not going to be calling you an idiot, because I get often referred to as a poor man's James O'Brien with my own views. Which, I mean, apparently, I don't know why that's a bad thing, so I'm going to take it as a compliment.
It's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a mighty, mighty achievement. How weird does it feel to you to be articulating optimism? Because I think if the speech had been slightly different, I'm not sure I would have done. I kind of, you don't do this for a living, so you won't have this necessarily, but that almost like the curse of the liberal to sort of to try to be balanced or to try to be measured, whereas actually I want to feel optimistic and I want to feel hopeful.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just got the postman at my door, sorry.
That's all right.
There we go. Thank you, buddy. So, yeah, I think it's...
You can tell we're live. What did you get? What are you getting? What's he delivered?
Oh, just letters, bills, and everything else that happens in everyday life.
There you go. So how does it feel? What's your relationship with optimism after the last 4 or 5 prime ministers that we've had?
Well, I've never been one to vote, especially when it comes to Tory and Conservatives, since they've got a much more detailed history of, telling non-truths and giving false promises, like a certain Farage that we won't mention. But I think I'm very aware that this could go slightly wrong.
How could it go wrong, do you think? I mean, in terms of, because that's a great sigh, because he's not going to bring Suella Braverman back, is he? He's not going to do something that just immediately demolishes any semblance of integrity, professionalism and accountability. They're desperately trying to turn some probably slightly ill-advised personnel decisions into huge stories, but the people doing it were the people who gave a free pass to Boris Johnson when he put the son of a KGB spy in the House of Flipping Lords. So nobody sensible is going to fall for that. If we were to call ourselves the sensibles, what would early failure look like? What could it? How? Because I'm not sure I can answer that question.
No, I think in terms of, I mean, what you could consider an early failure, I guess, would be, you know, the removal of the winter fuel allowance for the elderly. I think that's an early misstep in, like, just my opinion of it. I think 'cause there's a lot, obviously, I know.
Talked about that at the end of last week. It'd be interesting to see what the public feeling does. It'll be interesting to see how the momentum of objection gathers. I'll tell you what it does, Andreas. It speaks to the critique coming from the left, not the right. In terms of things that could go wrong for him, it is arguably being illiberal on law and order, which right-wing people like, or being, as you say, unwise on the removal of the winter fuel allowance for approximately 10 million pensioners, many of whom will notice it, even if it won't have a particularly profound effect upon their finances. But the figure for whom it will have a potentially profound effect could be as high as 2 million. So they get 880,000 people eligible for it but not currently claiming it signed up, and that figure comes down to around 1 million. And if Keir Starmer is portrayed as sacrificing the welfare of 1 million old age pensioners upon the altar of pay rises for, and you know how hard the right wing works then to demonise the public servants or the workers in previously or currently public sector jobs like doctors and nurses and train drivers, that I don't know. I mean, 1 million pensioners rendered slightly worse off in order to contribute to a process that will see doctors hopefully stop leaving the profession in their dry. It just depends how it's sold. Thank you, Andreas. John's in Liverpool. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I'll say this. I've been a Labour voter all my life, but I'm having doubts about Steer Karma now.
Steer Karma. Was that deliberate or accidental?
No, you just said to that guy there, I want to hear from the public.
No, did you say Steer Karma by accident or on purpose?
Well, it was a mistake.
No, I love it. Go on. I thought it was. Sorry, carry on, John. I won't interrupt you again.
I'll get back to the point. You just said to that guy, I'd like to see what the public think of this.
Yes.
Isn't it funny? It wasn't in his manifesto because about taking the winter fuel from the pensioners.
But the whole point of the speech was to stress that the £22 billion hole in the public finances was unexpected. So, in a way, that gives him a free pass on manifesto pledges, in a way.
Yeah, do you think in 4 years or 5 years when he's up for parole again, and I say that sarcastically,
Yeah.
When he's up in 4 or 5 years, do you think the pensioners are going to stand by him again?
I don't know. Do you?
No, they won't. Well, I'll tell you what. I'd love to hear pensioners coming on to talk to you, and see how many reaction you get. Oh yeah.
Well, we did. I think we did 2 hours on that last week, and it was largely mixed. But respectfully, John, you don't sound as if you're paying much attention to the speech that we've just heard. You're cross about something that happened a couple of weeks ago, and you're still cross about it.
I'm cross about when a politician tries to be elected for Prime Minister,
yes,
that they don't lie. And everyone's saying he doesn't lie. He's lied. Why didn't he come out and say, when I'm elected, I've got to take the winter fuel to establish...
because the public finances are much worse than Labour expected before entering government. The Treasury, not the Daily Mirror, the Treasury has identified a £22 billion shortfall this year alone.
So his team, so you're telling me his team, the plenty of team that he's got, never seen that coming? No,
I'm telling you, the Institute of Fiscal Studies said it could be as high as between 10 and 20 billion, but no one thought it would be at the upper end of that, let alone higher than it. What is it you don't understand about this? I mean, everybody says, nobody's arguing with the shortfall.
If I wanted to look into something, if I was going for something,
yes,
I would get my team and say, look, we want to investigate there. What's going on here?
But the speech addressed this. The speech addressed the fact that they were essentially making spending pledges that they knew they wouldn't be able to keep because they knew they were going to lose the election, and that they were trying to ambush the Labour Party with the.
Well, I'll tell you one last thing. He's lost my vote. He's lost my vote.
He didn't have it, did he?
And he's lost the votes of a lot of pensioners.
Well, we will see. We will see. But
we'll see. We will see. Yeah, and I'll come back to you in 4 years.
What are you so cross about, John? It was a really interesting speech. He's explained why there has to be a withdrawal of winter fuel payment. You might not agree with it, but you shouldn't let it get to you on this sort of level.
It does, because it's always the pensioners.
Well, you didn't vote for him, did you? Did you really vote for him? Because you sound like you hate him.
Well, to be honest, I am beginning to now.
It's great. It's moved very quickly, and so that if I found a £22 billion shortfall in your personal finances, you'd have to make the savings somewhere, and you're a pensioner, so it would be pensioners that got most affected.
Why didn't you put it in as a manifesto then?
Because the £22 billion black hole in the public finances had not been established, I mean, literally, John. The massive... I thought he was being a bit too repetitious. I literally found myself thinking, all right, mate, enough about the black hole. Can you get on with what you're going to do to fix things now? But obviously he needed, for you at least, to talk a little bit more about the black hole. It's a hole and it's black. And it contains an absence of £22 billion. But that doesn't mean that the decision to save a couple of billion, is it? It doesn't mean the decision to save that money by taking away the winter fuel payment from 10 million pensioners was the correct or the fair thing to do, albeit that only 2 million of them, if that's a fair phrase to use, have been identified as being in any way put at risk by the policy decision. 11:30 is the time. I suppose if you were doing Keir Starmer promotion, you would say, well, it proves he's capable of taking tough decisions. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 11:34 is the time. What is critiquing going to look like? I was worried about John's blood pressure, but you're right to point out that the idea that pensioners are always the people that get hit hardest by government is palpably absurd. The triple lock, as Neil in Skipton and many others point out, is the only thing that's been safeguarded over the last few years. It's everybody else that has to suck up the consequences of austerity or government policy. So I don't want to sit here and defend it because I don't like it, as we discussed last week. But if you accept the necessity of doing something, there's a case to be made for that thing being the least bad option. And that speaks directly to what the entire speech was about. Things are going to get worse before they get better. Ideally, if Great British Energy works, then energy bills will come down enough to render the winter fuel payments unnecessary anyway. The idea of still giving money to pensioners to pay their energy bills when the energy bills are no longer prohibitively expensive would be a little bit silly. But I wonder, what critique is going to look like. How are the right going to go after Starmer? At the moment, they're trying to go after him for cronyism, which is objectively hilarious. Given, I don't even need to mention the PPE contracts. I'll just keep mentioning the son of the KGB spy that he put in the House of Lords. And they're the ones getting upset about cronyism. Boris Johnson had 2 ethics advisors resign on him in disgust at his absence of ethics. So I guess, with a full right-wing client media in full sail behind you, you might be able to make cronyism accusations land, but it's going to be a little bit odd, isn't it? It's going to be a bit of a push. I think Starmer's loudest critics are going to come from the left. And for good or for ill, the left doesn't really have any platforms in the UK media to speak of. I'm a centrist. I might strike the average sort of crypto-fascist as left-wing, but I am essentially a centrist. And I'm the only lefty half of these people can ever think of, apart from Carol. Now she's joined the team at LBC. So the critique from the left is probably going to be more vicious than the critique from the right at the moment. But who's going to hear it? It's an interesting period in politics. You worry when you've got a boring prime minister doing boring things. You worry for your business if you do what I do. There's a little bit of self-interest concern, but it's a really interesting period in politics. Everything is up for grabs. And the first thing I'd say to you is that I think integrity, professionalism and accountability, which we applauded to the rafters when Rishi Sunak promised to bring them back and mourned together when he didn't, I think they're back. I really do. And it may not be sexy. It may not be clickbait. It may not be snake oil, but I think we really, really need it. 11:37 is the time. Alistair is in Stowe. Alistair, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello,
I suppose I'm very pleased that he did the speech in the Rose Garden, because the analogy that I use is that Rose Garden was allowed to overgrow and become completely out of control for 14 years. Now they've got the garden clearers in, it's going to take quite some time to actually find out what's at ground level. You never know. There might even be Dominic Cummings' car parked on one of the bushes
or his spectacles, his missing contact lenses.
Absolutely. So I think generally as a nation, we expect things to be done instantaneously, and the way that social media is, and the way that you can just click on your phone and buy something and it's there sometimes within minutes. We almost as a nation expect things to be done just like that, and that's not how this is. I'm all for having boring politicians where I don't need to see things splashed all over the headlines. I don't want the government necessarily to be getting involved in my day-to-day life. I just want it to work. And
it was also, as a couple of people have pointed out, including Mike, it was a bit of a masterstroke because it allowed him to resurrect the ghost of Boris Johnson's lockdown parties, didn't it?
So absolutely it did. And
do you think the country's ready?
Let's just almost imagine that didn't happen, because sometimes we've just got to draw a veil over stuff. I wouldn't rescue Boris Johnson if he was in the pond just straight in front of me.
Well, another analogy. Do you think that the country is ready for this? And you mentioned the social media and its increasingly unbearable violence, verbal violence. So it's very important not to take that as a litmus test of what the actual nation is like. So what is the nation like? Who knows? Because the massive majority of mainstream print media, as we often discuss on the programme, is right-wing. The BBC's neutrality is portrayed by deeply bad actors as somehow being left-wing. We don't know what the country just voted the Labour Party into government with an absolutely humongous majority. But when you dig into the numbers, it's a wide but shallow majority, and far from, in the context of another general election, it's far from unassailable. It's unassailable in the Parliament, in the term of Parliament. So how do we know whether the country is ready to take its medicine, as it were? Because John wasn't ready to take his medicine, but is it fair to say to the pensioners, albeit that they've had the triple lock for the last 5 million years, is it fair to say to them, you're getting the first dose, you're getting the first spoonful?
So the word I would use is clumsy as far as the introduction of that is concerned. I think there were 2 or 3 things that should have gone on beforehand.
Yes.
That they should have targeted. If they were going to target the winter fuel allowance, you start with those pensioners who were fortunate enough to be in the higher rate tax band.
Yes.
And it's fairly, and there's probably quite a considerable number of those.
Sure.
And when I get to pension age, I'll be in there. And do I need 200 quid or 300 quid? The answer is absolutely no. What I would also be looking at is that the way that the energy market is working is that the first £380 the first £36 per month that every single person pays does not buy 1 kilowatt hour of heat for them.
So you're talking about profits?
No, I'm talking about the standing charge.
Right, you are, yes. Which
and
contributes to the profits of the energy companies.
Well, yes, it does. But also, if you go back 3 or 4 years, I remember Kwasi Kwarteng standing up quite proudly and saying, when a couple of the big companies had gone bust, saying, well, this is how an open market is meant to work. That's fine, except the rest of us are now picking up the damage that actually caused through the standing charge.
I don't know if you legislate. Well, you can legislate for anything, I suppose, ultimately. But in terms of we need to get some money, we need to save some money now. I don't know that would be an alternative to the policy that they've actually introduced. It would be a lot more complicated and long term. But it was interesting to hear him say that the whole structure of the winter fuel payments was not very good. I forget the exact words that he used, but he was essentially saying that the system is not great, and that is part of the reason why they've had to come in with a suboptimal change to it. Alistair speaking about being a future pensioner. David is already one. As a counter to your previous pensioner, I would like to add the following to your debate. I am a new pensioner, James. However, as someone born after the 26th of September 1956, I am denied the winter fuel payment by the actions of the previous government. So all new pensioners have already been denied this payment by the Tories. I think Labour have made a poor decision to claw back a small amount, about £1.5 billion, but I don't understand why the previous actions of the Tory government are not being called out. Well, I suppose what you've done, A, is educate us, because a lot of us wouldn't have been fully across those facts, and B, remind us why the Tories are on fairly thin ice going after this as a policy decision, given that, as you remind us, it's one that they introduced, albeit for a smaller constituency of new and future pensioners as opposed to the ones that were already over the line. David, beg your pardon, Daniel is in Golders Green. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Hi. James, I found Keir Starmer's speech, in particular the bit about the upcoming painful budget,
yes,
incredibly dark, incredibly depressing and incredibly gloom-laden.
Did you?
I really did, because...
So you reject the analysis of a country in quite a lot of trouble at the moment?
No, that I don't, James. I don't.
So so if the diagnosis is bleak, how can the prescription not address that?
Because you want your prescription to be positive. You want a prescription to give you hope. You want a prescription to be...
I heard hope. I don't know what tax bracket you're in, but I am hopeful that the looming budget will be the first one in 14 years that doesn't make me better off than I went into it. I hope I come out worse off, because the broadest shoulders should be carrying the burdens now.
Well, James...
That gives me hope. Does that give you hope?
No, not at all. I find that language incredibly sinister, because when I look at... Because I'll tell you why. Because when you look at the tax rises implemented by the Conservative Party, 14 years of punishing tax rises...
Well, I came out of every single Tory budget better off than I went into it as a high tax payer.
Yeah, but the country didn't change, and let me explain.
Exactly.
Well, I'll give you three quick examples. Okay. James, the first one is when they went after the pensions. They reduced the pensions lifetime allowance, your pension pot, before you got a 55% tax charge.
Yeah, but you're talking like someone who's got a lot of money, and most of the country are not in that constituency.
No, but thousands of doctors who left the NHS because they didn't want to be hit by pension charges were. They then scrapped the Tory
These are Tory policies that you're critiquing in a call that is supposed to tell me that Keir Starmer's analysis of the situation was too bleak. You're now providing evidence of bleakness.
Well, yes, because we want positivity. We want
what
optimism.
Does positivity sound like?
Positivity sounds like saying we are going to get the economy growing.
Yeah.
We are going to.
We had all that from the last lot. They never shut up about how they were going to get the economy going. Liz Truss's entire disaster was built upon a promise to get the economy going. You wanted more good news for rich people, Daniel.
No, I didn't, James. I promise you I didn't.
Okay. I believe you, but give me another reason why that was, because I've come away hopeful and optimistic, and you've come away bleak and pessimistic. I want to understand the difference between us.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why. It also, the last 2 months of this horrendous regime, I'll be honest with you, it's partly why, because they've just announced, James, in the last 2 months, this Labour government, £30 billion worth of spending pledges, 11.6 billion on overseas climate aid, 9.4 billion on the junior doctors, 3 billion on Ukraine, 8 billion on Great British Energy, but yet they're saying at the same time that they haven't got the money to give $1.5 billion for pensioners a winter fuel payment or raise the 2-child benefit cap. Can you see, James, the big problem with that?
No, I would point at some of that as being, speculate to accumulate. You want the economy to grow, so the Great British Energy project, which we all as patriots have to hope succeeds, is necessary. Abandoning Ukraine in their hour of need is an unconscionable prospect that I'm surprised you even mention out loud. the junior doctors, as you've told us a minute ago, the NHS is hemorrhaging doctors, and which you were complaining about, and now you're complaining about policies designed to attract them to the profession and keep them in it, which I think you can agree now that you've heard me repeat your own words back to you, sounds absolutely bonkers. And overseas aid is probably the best chance we've got of addressing some of the things that the last 4 governments have been obsessed with, i.e. the exodus of people from parts of the world that are becoming uninhabitable to the parts of the world that are habitable. So that's all brilliant and very uplifting.
James, you sort of misquoted me a bit, James, because I don't. I'm not critiquing giving junior doctors money. My point is about the political choices of where the money is being spent. That's my point, James.
It's come from 8 million pensioners who don't need it, under the most cynical analysis of the winter fuel payment decision.
Well, that is very cynical. 8 million. It's not 8 million that don't need it.
It is.
A lot of those 8 million.
2 million who may move into problematic territory as a consequence of the policy decision. 880,000 of whom would be entitled to it if they signed up. So we can remove them from the equation already. But I think what I'll take away, and I enjoy talking to you, Daniel, but I will take away from this the effortless shift from complaining about doctors leaving the NHS for financial reasons to complaining about a policy designed to help the NHS retain doctors for financial reasons.
James, you got me.
That's what I do, mate. 11:51. I've just clocked that the contenders for content in the next hour are 2 of my favourite, or at least speak to 2 of my all-time favourite things, darts and Oasis. I don't know. Can we get an hour talking about how excited we are about Oasis finally getting back together and wondering where their place is in the rock pantheon? Do you know how old Mick Jagger is, by the way? As I just mentioned the rock pantheon. Have you seen Mick Jagger on stage? I tease my mum every time she gets in her stair lift about being more or less the same age as Mick Jagger, who looks like he could do the can-can at the Folies Bergère. It's like absolutely extraordinary. I don't think Liam and Noel are going to end up in that kind of state when they're his age, because they've already complained, particularly Liam, about sort of debilitating physical issues. I don't know whether they'll be sort of Zimmer framing their way onto the stage at Wembley. But I don't know. So, because the other story, and as Keith says, the Oasis story is kind of now or never. It's kind of today. Well, we could do it. It depends, because we're all going to try and get. Some might say it's now or never. Very good, definitely, maybe. The tickets go on sale on Saturday. Of course, I won't be here on Saturday. So Saturday you could probably do it. Maybe Friday could do it on Friday for people who are going to get their tickets to. Or do we just do? I don't know. Anyway, that's coming up next. Much less controversial territory first. Isn't Keir Starmer wonderful? 0345 6060 973. Jim's in Glasgow. Jim, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
Good to have you back. Listen, this is for John in Liverpool. I'm one of the pensioners who's lost their heating allowance, and I'm not angry about it. It's just one of these things. It's economics they were talking about. They had to do that early because they had to send letters out early to people who were getting their heating allowance. Some get it in October, November, December and January. So they had to put that out first to stop everything being printed. That's that. Now, I'm Labour.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a sort of logistical, bureaucratic necessity, which I tried to explain that, but you've done a much better job than me. You could have had a much more long-term, complicated tinkering, but if you wanted to smack it early, you needed to do what they did.
That's it. Now, going back to what he said this morning, it's good to have an adult in the room, shall we say.
Yes.
There's no ifs or buts. He's reading it as he sees it, and I quite agree with it. I'm Labour through and through. I've been hit with this. And also, before the Tories left, they also hit me with tax, being a pensioner, because they didn't put the personal allowance up when they hit us with the triple lock. So they take it and give it. That's that. So I'm getting hit with the tax as well.
Not all, obviously, but some of the negativity that was coming into the studio that I didn't read out because for reasons that will become clear, was coming from Scotland, and it was complaints about things that Keir Starmer hasn't had the time to turn his attention to yet, or a sense that we're having English-centric conversations, which is a criticism of me, not a criticism of Keir Starmer. So it's interesting to hear you from Glasgow looking at a Prime Minister in Westminster and arriving at similar conclusions to the one that I've arrived at.
Yes, but could I also just add that I'm going to talk here now about Rachel Reeves in the budget in October.
Yes, all to play for.
He was talking about reforming the House of Lords. Now, what he could do, but to show us that we're all in it together. I know it's not going to cover the gap, but what he could do, and I would be quite happy if he did this, just to show us that we're not all in it. We're all in it together. They get £330 a day to sit in there. And one person, 3 days is £1,000, give or take a couple of bob.
Yeah.
Now, that would be a start. That would be
just take it off them.
£40,000 a year per person.
A proper reform of the House of Lords would be very interesting, and I think you're right. I mean, you're nibbling at the edges, Jim, of the fiscal pie, as you well know. But sometimes it's not about the size of the slice, is it? It's about the principle of the pie. I mean, and some of the people in the House of Lords. This is why the Tories talking about cronyism is so hilarious. What was the name of that young woman that Boris Johnson put in the House of Lords for reasons that nobody's ever really been able? Was it Charlotte Owens? Literally, she was about 12. And she got put in the House of Lords. Everyone's talking about cronyism because Wahid Ali got access to the Downing Street barbecue for 20 minutes. Extraordinary. But yeah, the House of Lords is a place I'd like to see some serious reform. John says, if you love Keir Starmer so much, why don't you marry him? I think we're both already married, John. And Sam says, genuine question, how long will you give Keir Starmer before you start holding him to account? Mate, you need to know what that phrase means. No offence, Sam, I'm sure that I'm not describing you now. But sometimes people who don't think about things like to happen upon phrases that they think are powerful because they've heard clever people use them. You hold someone to account when they do something for which they should be held accountable. So we held Keir Starmer to account last week for the decision regarding the winter fuel payments, although it did not turn out to be as unpopular broadly as it is with a either directly affected constituency or the slightly idealistic left, with which I often flirt, who sort of feel, the magic money tree type accusation. And I don't buy that accusation. But I do think he probably could have found some money somewhere else without going after this vulnerable part of the country. So that's holding someone to account. If he puts the son of a KGB spy in the House of Lords, I'll be after him like a rat up a drainpipe. If he introduces absolutely insane economic policies that triple our mortgages almost overnight, Sam, I'll be after him like a rat up a drainpipe. If he behaves in a way in Downing Street that completely defies any expectations of ethical considerations, whether it's with regard to his wallpaper or his promotion of people into jobs that they're supremely unqualified for, I'll be after him like a rat up a drainpipe. If one of his key allies in Parliament is found to have broken lobbying rules and they then seek to set fire to the lobbying rules instead of holding their own colleague to account and seeing him face the punishment he's been handed by a committee of his own, I'll be after him like a rat up a drainpipe. If he's found to have lied to the House of Commons by a committee of his own, I'll be after him like a... Do you see where we're going with this, Sam? Holding people to account depends upon their behaviour. You can't just say, I'm holding someone to account, and then just go, grrr. Well, I suppose you can, but you'd be an idiot. Frank's in Liverpool. Frank, the reputation of your city rests entirely upon your shoulders. What would you like to say?
Yeah. To be honest, I listened to most of the speech, and it did give me hope.
Good. Joanna.
I'm 75.
Yes.
I'm lucky enough, my pension's good enough that I certainly don't need the winter fuel allowance. I'm felt guilty taking it. I mean, it's not that good, but It's good enough that I get by.
So you buy the idea that the money's got to come. The money's got to come from somewhere.
An honest broker, and I hope it stays that way. We really need that. I know too many people who talk about they're all the same. They're all in it for themselves. It's not worth voting. And we need something to change.
And he needs to be dull to do that. I mean, if he had a little bit more pizzazz, it would not be a bad thing. But the last thing you want is someone who prioritises pizzazz over principle or over integrity, professionalism and accountability. You almost relish the dullness because it means that he's not going to try and sell you fireworks while, claiming that it's something different.
Well, some time ago, I had to listen to a bloke who was being interviewed on TV in his 40s, and he said that he knew Johnson was a buffoon, but he's a likeable buffoon.
Yeah, he's my buffoon. It was my buffoon. Yeah, that was so dispiriting, wasn't it, in the context of the country, never mind simply the electorate. Thank you, Frank. Liverpool's reputation restored. Phil, apologies. Annie, Billy, and others. We're not going to return to that precise territory, but just to keep Sam happy, as soon as Keir Starmer puts a foot wrong, we can have a lovely phone-in about that and hold his feet to the fire. Can you do that? Can you hold someone's feet to the fire if they've put a foot wrong? I think you can, can't you? I think that's the time that you need to hold their feet to the fire. What do you want to talk about next? Genuine question. Oasis or the return of walk-on girls to the top flight of darts? A story about which I got very, very exercised a few years ago, to the point of putting it in one of my books. But I'm also very excited about Oasis. You're going to have to stay tuned to find out. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. I think I'm just going to roll with it and do the conversation about Oasis, because I've got to stop doing this. I've got to stop self-editing. I don't know why it started kicking in a bit since I came back from holiday. It's because we've had a complete change of political landscape, isn't it? And so it feels like unfamiliar territory to me. So when I'm discussing politics, there's a voice in my head that wasn't there before, a sort of voice of caution, saying that things have changed, things are different. I haven't found my new jam yet, almost. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So I'm sort of second-guessing myself a lot. I need to stop doing that. Instead, we're going to go in on Oasis. Why? Because it's an absolutely huge story. As the lead singer of the Oasis tribute band in Thomas Watts's news bulletin there said, they are our generation's Beatles. And I don't know that they are, you see. But I'll tell you something odd. Liam Gallagher was headlining at Reading this weekend. I think he was at Leeds as well. I'll tell you something odd. And I want to have a broader conversation about music this hour, not just about the news that Oasis are going to reform. I wouldn't bet your house on it, by the way. They could easily fall out again. There's nothing performative or fake, inauthentic about the hatred between the Gallagher brothers. It's entirely real, but I suspect that the prize is so glittering. I read somewhere they could make up to £40 million each out of this. The prize is so glittering that you have to hope they can put their disagreements, put their divisions behind them, and move on to the stage. But what I find fascinating about them is the generational appeal. I was talking to a mate. Actually, I was talking to a mate who tweeted something rather brilliant about Keir Starmer's speech a minute ago. I forgot to read it out. A pal of mine who works in the decorating trade, Gary, was talking about dry rot, and the which of course was the thing that Keir Starmer was talking about in his speech. And Gary writes, the rot analogy works very well. First you have to detect the rot, then remove it. It will look worse before you start to rebuild again. But pretending that the rot isn't an issue will never resolve the problem. It's a long-term repair as opposed to a quick botched job. So an actual decorator, although Gary is more of an artisan, than a mere splosher and splasher. And someone from the profession there going in on the importance of rot. And it was to Gary I was talking yesterday. And he's 12 years younger than me. And at one point in the conversation, he looked at me as if I'd lost the plot completely. I was trying to convey the extraordinary nature of a young person's relationship with recorded music for someone of my generation. They're all going to look at me now as if I've lost the plot. But I told you, didn't I, a couple of weeks ago, that I once washed my neighbour's car, and while in the for money, and while in the process of washing his car, I used to do inside and out. I was a very hard-working teenager. I clocked that he had about 20 bought chart cassettes in his car, and so I went and bought 10 TDK D90s or whatever they were called with my pocket money, and asked if I could record all of his albums, all of his. Because if you're my age, the only music you could play at home was music you had bought for quite a lot of money on a cassette or a vinyl record, and then a little later CDs, or it was the stuff that you'd recorded yourself off the radio. There was nothing else that you could play. And you try and explain that to a teenager and they look at you. I must have told you, I know I've told you a few times about being picked up by my late father at Digbeth coach station in Birmingham after a weekend trip to London to visit some old schoolmates. And I got off the coach in Digbeth, the National Express. And I was wearing some jeans that I had bought, I think in Hyper on Kensington High Street, or possibly in American Classics on King's Road, one of the shops I thought were very, very cool when I was visiting London from Kidderminster. And they already had holes in. So they were pre-owned Levi 501s, and they had a lot of holes in. These were probably more hole than jean, in fact, these jeans. And I'd spent quite a lot of money on them. And I thought they were the very height of sartorial swagger. I think, since you ask, I think I used to twin them with a pair of high-tech high tops. High-tech high tops. Whatever happened to high-tech high tops? And I got off the bus wearing trousers that, as I say, were probably more hole than trouser. And my dad looked at me with an expression I've occasionally caught myself demonstrating when discussing youthful matters with my children. My dad looked at me with such a mixture, a sort of a triple-pronged mixture of profound confusion, deep affection, and serious amusement. In other words, he loved me very much, and he couldn't understand why I was wearing what appeared to be some trousers that someone else had thrown away. But he found the combination very funny. And that's how they look at me sometimes now. The other way round, when I try and explain to them about... Because Spotify and obviously other streaming services are available. They get whatever they want now. And it also recommends music to them. So one of the things I've been denied as a father is recommending music to my children. Although I got the youngest into Belle and Sebastian recently. And that was lovely. But of course, by the next weekend, they've got every Belle and Sebastian album on their devices. And they're telling me about tracks that I'd forgotten about or I'd never... So you don't have the relationship that young people have with music today is completely different from the one. This isn't just an old bloke being weird on the radio. I just think it's significant because Oasis ride that wave of social change, possibly more than any other band. Certainly, possibly more than any other British band. Because Liam played Reading on Saturday night, and they all know the words. And they don't know the words because all of their boring dads have given them albums or young people, every single generation since Oasis was formed loves Oasis. Not all of you. Don't text me to say I don't. I tell you what, I don't often get irritated by texts. I usually love them because if they're really annoying, I can put them in Idiot's Corner. But if I say something like, an entire generation loves Oasis, and you say, well, I don't like Oasis, I prefer Blur. You're wasting your time, you're wasting my time. You could be just obviously not everybody likes them. I know that. But you don't achieve the levels of popularity that they achieve, and you certainly don't play to a field full of 16-year-olds in Reading on Saturday night unless you've pulled something off generationally that is remarkable. And I don't quite know what it is that is so remarkable. So I fully understand that some people will be completely immune to the enthusiasm that the announcement of Oasis's reformation has engendered. I completely understand that. But it's a big story. It's a big cultural moment. Some people don't like the Olympics. But when we're having a phone-in about the Olympics, I tend not to let the people come on who want to talk about how they don't like the Olympics because it's not the conversation that we're having. Today will be slightly different because you are entitled to explain, should you be so minded, why you don't think we should be making such a fuss about this band. But you will have to acknowledge in that critique the fact that I saw them play in, was it 2000, Keith, that last gig at Wembley? Was it in the year 2000? And my girls saw them play on Saturday night. Oh, not them, him. That is a gap, maths fans, of 24 years. And the excitement and you know, he was headline. He was the top act. He was the closing act at Reading in 2024. I saw the last gig they did as a band in London in the year 2000. So what is, I don't want to say what is the curious appeal of of Oasis, and it's not just in Britain, of course; it's all around the world. But where do we put Oasis? Is anyone else keeping up with my desperate attempts to shoehorn Oasis song titles into this introduction? I forgot until 2 minutes ago, honestly. Anyway, I've started now, so Lord, don't slow me down. But where do they sit in the pantheon of rock and roll? Okay, where do we put Oasis? Because for younger people, there won't be another reunion quite like this. I saw the Stone Roses in Heaton Park, by the way, and for my generation, that was probably a bigger deal than an Oasis reunion. But that's for a very specific generation that was neck deep in the whole Manchester movement and didn't think that Ian Brown and John Squire would ever bury the hatchet. So I think we've got that one out of the way. Where do we put Oasis in this? In the great scheme of things, all right? It's coming up to 1:15 because the story's going to be absolutely everywhere. You'll probably talk tonight about it when you get home. It's another one, Talk Tonight. See, most people don't even reckon. So I've done Talk Tonight, Lord Don't Slow Me Down, and All Around the World in the last 3 minutes. And you didn't even flipping notice, did you? Did you notice? No, you didn't. None of you noticed. Honestly. It's probably going to be in the Hindu Times tomorrow, this story. It's coming up to 12:15. Why are Oasis such a big deal? And should they be? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. All right. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And if you're thinking about ringing in, madam, to criticise my choice of topic, then, well, get off your high horse, lady. Rich has been in touch. If you like Oasis so much... It says, right, why don't you marry them? And I think you're the same Rich, I think, who sent in the same question about Keir Starmer. I think there's going to be a recurring theme here. 16 minutes after 12 is the time. Explain to a skeptic why Oasis are so brilliant. All right. Again, it's not a balanced conversation. It's not, because I think they're absolutely amazing. Why? He's a proper rock and roll star. Right, Liam Gallagher is a proper rock and roll star, and Noel Gallagher had an ability to write songs that were as powerful coming out of your radio as they were coming off the stage at the biggest stadiums in the world, the biggest stadia in the world. And look, I recognise the need to snark. I recognise the jokes about not knowing many chords or being a poor man's knockoff Beatles, but you've not been there when Supersonic or Wonderwall. This is not me shoehorning song titles. This is me deliberately using song titles, and if they can inflame my generation and my daughter's generation, then there's something special going on, isn't there? Steve's in Liverpool. Steve, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Steve.
You sound very different on the phone than on the radio for some reason. I wasn't sure if you was talking.
It's definitely maybe me.
I don't know, maybe you've got a cold or something. I'm not sure.
Go on.
Anyway, I'm a busker on the London Underground. I travel back and forth quite a lot.
Okay.
Always been a busker. I remember when Wonderwall and Don't Look Back in Anger came back. I can't remember when that was, early 90s, wasn't it? I didn't like Oasis, and I felt like I didn't particularly like those songs, but I knew that I should go out busking them. I think the reason why I wasn't that fussy on them is I didn't think they made much of a contribution to style. I felt like you could have dropped that band in anywhere in the previous 20, 30 years.
Yeah, actually, I would take that as a compliment, and yet you mean it as a criticism. Isn't that funny? Because you're a musician and I'm not.
Okay, but I remember being. It's like what I remember that when Firestarter came out with the Prodigy and watching that and having the back of my head blown off. You know, it was so different.
Can you busk that? Can you busk Firestarter?
No, I've never attempted.
No,
to.
There you go.
Exactly, but I've relented. It's a bit of a running joke. I've never. When you're busking, you get asked to play Wonderwall more than perhaps being asked every other song put together. But it's always put me off because it's always felt a bit very laddish. It's always a lad that's going, play Wonderwall, play Wonderwall.
But it's a love song. It's a love song. It's a romantic love song.
Well, it's also an anthem for lads. That's what.
Oh, I know it is, but I mean, it is both laddish and not laddish at the same time. It's a man talking about his feelings. We should be encouraging that sort of thing. I still don't know halfway through this conversation whether you are excited about their reunion or not.
I am, because I've recently relented, because you know that when you're busking, you're going to make a lot of money playing those two songs. I started playing them.
Got to give the people what they want, Steve. You've got to give the people what they want as a busker.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't know, I think it was the laddish thing that made me resist, but I started doing it recently. I cannot believe how many people love that song. It seems like every culture, every age, generation. Actually, I think that people prefer Don't Look Back in Anger now. That's the idea that I get.
So you do both of them?
I do both of them and do very, very well out of both of them.
How do you measure that? Give me an idea of what an average take would be as you go through your normal repertoire, and then how it increases when you give a little bit of Wonderwall or Don't Look Back in Anger.
It can, double.
I know it, but double, really?
Double, treble. A very good song, not just particularly those two, but
a classic that everybody loves, has a marked and immeasurable and immediate effect upon the coin.
Oh, God, yeah.
Or the clicks.
Boy, that's all I'll do now. I won't do any kind of offbeat song that only I like. I'll just
not if you're a busker. You have to save those for your solo gigs, Steve. You can't be doing the esoteric stuff. Where is your pitch as a busker? I shall come and say hello to you at a future date and check that you're playing.
Well, it's on anyone on London Underground. You don't get your own pitch. But
do you not? So you move around a bit, do you?
Yeah.
And what is it? Just you and a guitar?
No, I use monkey robots to then they play instruments and sing.
Well, how have I never seen that? I don't think I'd have forgotten about that in a hurry.
I don't think you have, because I would have recognised you.
Monkey robots? Roxy's seen it. The producer's seen it. Roxy's in for Eleanor today. Wait there, Steve. Cover your ears a bit. Is he any good? He's exciting, yeah. No, Roxy loves it. Did you give him any money? You didn't, did you? So we must pay our people more. Yeah, LBC. It's absolutely outrageous. Well, I shall look out for you, Steve. I mean, obviously, I'll know it's you now, won't I? Because there can't be two people doing monkey robots on the London Underground. Be a good name for a band, that.
It'll definitely be me. There's the thing with Oasis. It's the songs. After all these years, they like I said, I didn't feel they were that.
That's really interesting. From a professional musician, that's really interesting, because they took a lot of I was a showbiz journalist in their pomp, in their heyday, and there was quite a lot of snobbery around about the songs being derivative and simplistic, and I didn't really understand that, because I just thought they were fantastic for the reasons that Steve has alighted upon somewhat later in life than me, largely because you don't sing along to songs that aren't brilliant, really, that aren't in some way brilliant. I know you sing along to all sorts of toot, but they are in some way brilliant. It's like brainworms. They have to be reaching a part of your brain that other songs haven't reached in order to become a brainworm. But, and the list, when you look at the ones that he's mentioned, not even mentioning some of the other songs that are going to be absolute classics, like Rock and Roll Star or Cigarettes and Alcohol or Supersonic. I've stopped now, and no one's even mentioned Champagne Supernova yet, which is many people's favourite. So I think that one thing that will come with the reforming, with the reunion, is a reappraisal of the snobbery that accompanied them sometimes in their early years, and probably an acknowledgement that he's a superb songwriter. And Noel Gallagher is a superb songwriter, and Liam Gallagher is a frontman for the ages. Put the two together, and you've actually got Quicksilver. You've got something magical. James is in Lambeth. James, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Yeah, I'm calling because I've gone through a huge reappraisal of Oasis over the years. I'm similar age to you. When I listened to them first time round, I thought they were awful.
Did you?
I thought, yeah.
What were you listening to in the 90s, in the mid to late 90s?
So, I mean, I was a musician like the previous caller, so I was into, again, music that was kind of pushing the envelope a little bit more, so stuff like The Prodigy, absolutely.
Interesting.
I was a bit more into the American stuff, kind of grunge. I think musically they were doing much more challenging things than the UK indie scene. I mean, yeah.
So you were a proper indie kid, and Oasis were actually quite mainstream.
Yeah, for me, yeah.
Wonder Stuff are from Stourbridge, just down the road from me. Not got many claims to fame, Stourbridge, but that is one of them. Sorry, carry on, James.
Yeah, so I thought, the lyrics, I still think they're one of the worst lyricists of all time, but I'll put that in context. Huge plagiarists as well. I'm not sure there's a band that's plagiarised more than them. They're up at the sort of Led Zeppelin level of nicking other people's stuff without crediting.
Well, that's actually libelous. I don't think they're going to sue either of us. But just for the record, you can't do that in this day and age. Apart from, there was an interesting Ed Sheeran case recently. But if they had truly ripped people off, they'd have been sued to the highest heavens. But I understand what you mean. I can see your master plan.
They borrowed heavily, shall we say?
That's better.
And Liam was as a frontman. And again, I'll come back to that. I think again, the sort of non-performance as show made was nonsense to me. But 20, 30 years later, my kids have started getting into them, and I actually had to arrange an Oasis song for my school choir.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was studying the music, I suddenly realised that although I thought Noel was playing very sort of standard four-chord stuff, he's actually doing some quite subtly complex things that he slips in there.
How interesting.
And I suddenly kind of, having derided him as this sort of generic rip-off merchant, I suddenly realised he was actually a really brilliant songwriter. And obviously that's proved by the longevity of these songs.
You can't argue with that. You can't argue with it. Why do you think you missed it from a professional perspective? Why do you think you missed it the first time around?
It just sounded like loads of stuff I knew really well. The Beatles, T-Rex, it just sounded exactly like them. And I thought, what are they bringing to the table that's new? But I think that the genius was that he was, although the lyrics were often nonsensical, they weren't always, he was creating songs that people love to sing. And that's what a brilliant songwriter does.
When you say nonsensical, you mean he fit the words to the music, really?
Well, some of the, Champagne Supernova, there are lyrics in there that don't make sense. And lots of the Oasis lyrics don't make sense and deliberately don't make sense. They were just words to fit the space. But there are songs with subtle hidden meanings.
And the choruses work, but you're right. The verses sometimes just felt like he'd opened up a thesaurus and chosen some words and put them in no particular order. To paraphrase Eric Morecambe. Here's a lyric. You've just reminded me of this. It's not got anything to do with the conversation that we're having. But for me, and this is an absolute humdinger of a tune that everybody will be familiar with. But do you know what song this is from? Because this is a real lyric in a song that you will have heard a million times, and you may probably not have noticed how banal this lyric is. Are you ready for this?
Go on.
I don't want to see a ghost. It's the sight...
Oh, I know this one. Yeah. Life, what was the name?
Yeah,
can't remember
right.
now.
I'm going to do that as a hook and tease. Because nothing banal has happened yet, but what could possibly be coming next that has made James immediately recognise it as one of the maddest song lyrics ever written, even in comparison with Oasis. Will you be trying to get tickets, or is your
I would love to go. I mean,
if someone takes you.
I think it's going to be very unlikely that I'll get them, but yeah, it would.
There's a lot of gigs going on. I mean, we got tickets for Taylor, so we should be all right getting tickets for Oasis. It just depends how committed to the cause you are. So there it is. Thank you, James. That's two musicians there who've had, just as I said would happen. It's amazing, isn't it? It's almost like I know what I'm talking about. If only I could bring that kind of insight to the world of politics. You will reappraise Oasis, but partly because of all the attendant attention that they receive for fighting and taking lots of drugs and all the cigarettes and alcohol and all the, all that, the nasty, not nasty business, but all of that tabloid-friendly business. From a journalistic point of view, and I was an alleged showbiz journalist at the time, I think that the music got sidelined by the stories. Whereas for the punter, for the proper fan, the music was always more important than the stories, or at least as important as the stories. And now you've got the passage of decades, which means all of the attention, or much, much more of the attention, the feud between the two brothers notwithstanding, will actually be upon the music and the chemistry of their live performance. But here is the lyric that is often cited as the worst ever, I think fairly, and it knocks anything that Noel Gallagher ever wrote into a cocked hat. And I won't give you the final one until after the news. Are you ready for this? I don't want to see a ghost. It's the sight that I fear most. That's quite nice, right? And it's got a tumty-tumty-tum to it. It scans perfectly. I'd rather And then what do you think the next line of that lyric is from the great Gabrielle? Because you've heard that song a million times. Desiree, not Gabrielle. You've heard that song a million times. And I don't think you've ever clocked how absolutely extraordinary her choice of rhyme with Ghost and Most was when she came to write the third line of that verse of that song. And you're welcome to have a guess, but I will provide the answer after the very latest headlines with Amelia Cox. 12:32 is the time. If you're just tuning in, you'll have to use catch-up to find out what on earth I'm talking about when I tell you that there's quite a lot of Stourbridge-related content now coming into the studio. Obviously, I'm well aware that Ned's Atomic Dustbin also hail from Stourbridge, as indeed do... what's the other flipping band that comes from Stourbridge? I can't believe Pop Will Eat Itself. Stourbridge has an extraordinary pedigree. But it's Mike, I think, who deserves the most attention this afternoon for reminding me. Don't forget, James, Stourbridge also has one of the shortest railway branch lines in the world. Did you know that? I bet you didn't know that. Yeah, Stourbridge Junction to Stourbridge Town. You better blink and you'll miss it. And absolutely, it's the only bit as well. There's no stations after Stourbridge Town. It's a tiny, tiny little branch line. That concludes today's Stourbridge Trivia section of the programme. We return now to Oasis, who, to the best of my knowledge, have never sung about Stourbridge. But I bet one of those bands has supported them at some point over the last however many... Well, maybe not. I digress slightly. Why are Oasis so iconic? This is not an invitation to ring in and tell me that they're not, although I will leave the door open for that possibility. Before we move on to that, I need to deliver on that promise that I made just before the news, don't I? So here it is. I don't know how many of you guessed it correctly, actually genuinely guessed it, because there's not a lot that rhymes with Ghost and Most. Tasked? That's quite niche. So this is what the lyric actually contains. I don't want to see a ghost. It's the sight that I fear most. I'd rather have a piece of toast and watch the evening news. There's no and there. Watch the evening news. And it sounds beautiful. It's a beautiful song. It's an upbeat song. It's a lovely, lovely song. But it sprang to mind when James, a moment ago, was talking about how Noel Gallagher's lyrics often sound as if any words will do, you know. Isn't that a song itself? And you know, that's Any Dream Will Do. Any words will do. So he's written a lyric, he's written a song, he's written the music, and he just needs to, and he's got a great chorus, like whether it's Wonderwall or Champagne Supernova, but then, or Supersonic, and then he just needs to find some words to get from chorus to chorus. And sometimes he doesn't appear to have worked very hard. But it doesn't matter, because as Pete Doherty of the Baby Shambles said, he's a poet. I don't know that Richard is taking things seriously. He goes, they are the 90s shawaddy waddy. 12:34 is the time. Mark's in Glasgow. Mark, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller, and I never imagined in all my life, all the times that I've been thinking about phoning in and not thinking I'd be intellectual enough to talk to you about Brexit or Boris or the Tory party, and we're now talking about Oasis. Incredible.
I got you in the end.
Yeah, you did, mate. You got me eventually. So my Oasis story is I'm 57 years of age now, so around about the late 80s, early 90s, obviously dance music really started to kind of kick in the UK, and the underground dance scene was massive at that point, and we were very much kind of into that. And my mate phoned me up and said, listen, I've come across this album by a rock group. Come and have a listen. And I remember going to his loft, basically, he's up the stair in his loft, and he played me Definitely Maybe. And it kind of, in many ways, James, changed my life. Changed my thought process on, rock music. To be fair, Oasis are still the only rock band that I will listen to. But it was just such an eye-opener, and as you're talking about lyrics and you're talking about the type of music that they played at the time, it was just amazing.
Well, they did, didn't they? So, to go Anaraki for a while, you'd have listened to Stone Roses or Screamadelica by Primal Scream, which I think were both huge influences on Oasis, but they didn't do dance. They went all in on rock and roll, which actually, as you say, was rather unfashionable at the time.
It was. Obviously the Manchester music scene at that point was also starting to really bubble along, wasn't it? Where, as you say, Primal Scream, the Stone Roses.
But everything had a dance. Everything had a dance route to it, didn't it? Yeah. Even the stuff like, because Primal Scream were a rock and roll band before Screamadelica, and indeed after. If you listen to something like Rocks Off or their earlier stuff, but Oasis were unapologetically a rock and roll band. And we hadn't heard that before.
No, and as I say, I never particularly liked that genre of music before.
No?
And then I listened to this album in this tiny loft up the stair.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Did you ever see them live?
James, I've been very fortunate. I've seen them live many
How
times.
How many?
Off the top of my head, maybe 10 times.
Crikey, you really were a hardcore fan.
Yeah, well, I went to see Liam. Liam played up in the Oval, Hydro in Glasgow a couple of months ago, so I actually went to the Definitely Maybe reunion, listened to that, which was fantastic. But I was fortunate that one of our friends up here in Glasgow was the promoter for Oasis. Oasis were actually discovered in Glasgow. I don't know if you're aware of that. But they were discovered in a place called King Tut's Wawa Hut.
I was reading about this the other day. So Alan McGee was there, wasn't he?
Alan McGee was there, absolutely. So
he rang. Did he ring Paolo Hewitt? He rang someone from the and said, "We've got to get these guys signed straight away. We've got to get this."
Yeah. So we had a friend of Alan McGee who basically, when Oasis started to properly, get gigs and started to, when Definitely Maybe came out, I think in 1994, it just exploded. So I was at a number of, I've seen them all over Scotland, up in Aberdeen, Glasgow many times, down in Loch Lomond, all over the place, mate. So we were very fortunate that I've seen them live loads of times.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always dream of having caught someone massive on the way up and when they were still playing small gigs. It'd be very, very special because you'd know you were in the presence. There's never any guarantee, but you'd know you were in the presence of something on the sort of ground floor. Thank you, Mark. Ned is in Cambridge. Do you have an atomic dustbin?
You know what? I was plagued with that as a teenager, and I used to play in a band, and I'm still playing a band. Going, "You need to atomic dustbin." I'm like, "No," but if I had £1 for every
single time you've heard, I'm so sorry, but it was because it had just come up before on the moment, and what are the odds? You don't get many Neds on the programme, Ned. So I had to.
No, you don't. Bless you. You know what I mean? I count myself as you feel almost one and only, but exactly. But you took us down memory road here very much. And remember the time we were talking about the scene as it was, and remember it was baggy, wasn't it? Everyone was listening to baggy, all the bands were baggy, and they were just coming out of the Smiths and that sort of thing. But when I heard Oasis, I heard them on Gary Crowley's show about 2:00 in the morning. Remember that? We used to come in from the pub.
Yes.
And I heard Supersonic. I thought, my God, this is vital. I've never heard anything like it in my life. Even though I was a massive Beatles fan and what have you, I thought this lot are so perfectly formed in one go. I went out, bought the album on cassette, took it around my mates in the band. You've got to hear this. And the whole album was just mind-blowing. And then
why was it? I mean, you mentioned Gary Crowley, who I think he was very much at the forefront of bringing bands like the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Jam to public attention. And there was, that's what I was saying to the last fella, that I hadn't heard rock and roll like that. You mentioned the Smiths. No one would call the Smiths rock and roll in the sense of they make you want to tear your shirt off and jump on your mate's shoulders. That's what dance had done. Because dance music had created a completely different vibe. Oasis came along and they were taking us back, but also taking us forward. If that doesn't sound too cliched.
No, it doesn't actually. But also, do you remember the time I was playing in bands at the time, still playing a lot of rock music, and then dance music was exploding everywhere you went. And I remember walking through Cambridge when I lived here as a kid, and one day you'd walk through central town, and everyone had Smiths t-shirts and Cure t-shirts on, and floppy jumpers and what have you.
Yeah.
And the next weekend, everyone had a Roses t-shirt on and chippy trainers and Wrangler jeans. It was like, what happened? Like, did everyone kidnap the dog?
It was like Kathy Burke coming back from Manchester as Perry, wasn't it? I love that. She posted that clip yesterday, and it's an absolutely beautiful piece of comedy.
Yeah, exactly. But it was like, hang on a minute, and they did seem to bring rock back into the fold. I think spoke to a group of people that weren't quite sure about going out to raves, because going out to raves, there was drugs, and people were like, I'm not sure if we should be doing drugs, and it looks a bit weird, and I'm not sure if we, so I think it spoke to a great group of people about
old school feelings.
But what I will say is,
go on, there's a butt coming. There's a big butt coming.
There is a big butt coming, and we like big butts.
I cannot lie.
Right. The butt is, I saw them live, I think in Glastonbury, I think it was 94 and 95, and I was so excited. I couldn't wait to hear them. I really, really, really hope that they bring a show this time round, because live, they look like a bunch of milkmen, no show,
looked at their shoes. Liam was effing and jessing at everyone at Glastonbury.
Yeah.
Completely brought the whole vibe down. And then I was broken. I was so disappointed that they were that bad. And then Lenny Kravitz came on and blew them off the stage like you wouldn't believe, with his, leopard skin cat suits.
The whole shebang.
And I just thought, oh God, lads. So I went from being their biggest fan to being so bitterly disappointed with them. So I really do hope they bring the show this time round and actually do something decent rather than their usual.
Just go through the motions. He's a good. He is a good front man, though. I mean, obviously there are good days and bad days, but would you not put him down as one of the great front men of all time?
I think as a thing, Hunched Over His Mic Stand and what have you, like in the way Ozzy Osbourne might be or Alice Cooper, but what's going on behind them, and it could just be anyone. It could just be you and me playing.
Well, speak for yourself. Speak for yourself, Ned. That definitely couldn't be me. That is actually an anxiety dream that I used to have. I don't know why I haven't had that anxiety dream for so long, but I used to have a gender. Thank you, Ned. Lovely stuff, and thank you for being patient with my ludicrous attempt at incredibly obvious humour. Here's a question you might want to answer. Not Ned, you. What does it say that no women are phoning you, James? Well, look, the curse of the phone-in is mansplaining. The temptation to ring in seems to be a lot more resistible to women than it is to men, historically. I think Sheila and I take more calls from women than anybody else in the history of phone-in radio. But you're right, I don't think, looking at the board, I don't think I've got a woman waiting to talk. So rather than being snarky about it, why don't you tell me? What does that say? That there are no women phoning in? So I've got teenage daughters who were very, very excited to see Liam Gallagher on Saturday night, and one of them seen him 4 or 5 times. Festivals, not necessarily seeking out solo specific or whatever band they're in at the moment. But the question that do Oasis appeal to women, or is it just a bunch of middle-aged men who are getting very? No, we know it's not. We know it's got a generational appeal. Maybe younger women are more into Oasis than women of our age, of the Gallagher brothers' age. I don't know. Anyway, there's a mystery for you to solve. 0345 6060 973. Quite a few of you have got memories like Ned's. Gareth says the Foo Fighters blew Oasis off the stage and they were the support act. There are some questions here on just what their reputation is as a live act. But I was at Wembley. You can't really tell how good someone is at Wembley, can you? But when we saw Taylor last month, it was so far away. And I spend most of the time watching the kids' faces anyway because they're so excited. But I don't know. I don't know whether they're any good live. Stone Roses were a bit rubbish live as well, quite often. Ian Brown famously struggled with the lyrics quite a lot of the time, but there's something else is going on at those concerts that has nothing to do with it. Oh, here you go. Here's a phrase I will introduce into the lexicon at this point in proceedings. A lot more than the sum of its parts. It's 12:46. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Part of the reason for the reunion, apparently, I read somewhere, I don't know if this is unfair because I didn't actually see Noel Gallagher's appearance on the Jules Holland show, but he tried to do a New Order song and absolutely tanked it. And at the same time, Liam, his brother, his estranged brother, I love the word estranged, his estranged brother was just singing Oasis staples to absolutely rapturous and enormous clouds. And Noel, of course, wrote them all. It must be the pill is sugared for Noel Gallagher when his brother is singing Oasis classics to a stadia full of people because he wrote all the songs, so he gets all the money. I mean, the royalties. I presume he's much better off than his brother is, regardless of what's happened in their solo careers, because he wrote or almost all of the Oasis classics. So you'd look at that and you'd think, what is on the next 30? If I stay alive for another 30 years, I wrote these flipping songs, and no one wants to hear me sing them. It's quite poignant, isn't it? No one wants to hear me sing them. Everyone wants to. I haven't used the phrase "our kid" yet, but that's what he would think, you see. He would think everyone wants to hear our kid sing them. No one wants to hear me sing them. And that I read, and who knows, I used to write this build, so I could tell you it's not always sourced impeccably. Showbiz Insider. A Showbiz Insider told me that Noel Gallagher thought that maybe it's time to bury the hatchet with Liam after performing on the Jules Holland show and receiving a lot of online abuse for his poor rendition of a New Order classic. So but that would make sense, wouldn't it? You wrote all those songs and nobody wants to hear you sing them. And that your brother smashes it as a frontman. But we shall see. 12:48 is the time. We've got a woman on the line. Amazing. Why, Melissa in Islington, are you the first woman to ring me about Oasis? And have you got your radio on in the background?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So what would you like to say, Melissa?
I just wanted to say that
this is appalling tokenism. You've been rushed onto the programme because you're a woman, and you're not even ready for it. You probably wouldn't have got it. I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but they probably lowered the bar a bit, and now you're all nervous and you don't know what to say.
No, that's not true.
Oh,
I mean,
good.
I wouldn't normally call into your programme because your politics don't normally align with mine. But I can say that
we're talking
in regards
about Oasis.
But in regards to Oasis, I saw them in Loch Lomond, 96, early part of August 96, about 2 weeks before Nebworth. It was the best thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. Still not untouchable. Just absolutely. It was like
tell me why. Tell me what parts they reached.
Amazing.
What parts did they reach that other bands cannot reach?
A sense of... Well, I don't want to do that. I could, but I won't.
Okay. What is it about people whose politics differ from mine? They always sound so weird. Stephen's in Manchester. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. Well, I'm 50, so in 94 I was 20. Quick bit of mental arithmetic there.
Well done.
And I followed Oasis around for about 3 or 4 years. From summer '94, I first saw them at the Manchester University.
When you say you followed them around, I mean you don't mean literally, but you just mean you went to as many gigs as you possibly could.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't nip around Burnage and hang outside Sifted all afternoon. No. Gigs from, like I said, Manchester University through the Hacienda when they launched Definitely Maybe. I was stood next to Sean Ryder that night, right away through to Main Road, coach trips from Manchester to Paris.
Yeah.
At the Zenith in '95.
Was there a? I mean, did you? I presume when you're at this level of fandom, you recognise people at gigs, and there's almost a sort of community of committed fans, or not?
Not so much with Oasis. I have that with another band. I watch James. I've seen James nearly 70 times now, and you do see the same thing.
They're my
Oasis
favourites.
Probably not in the '90s.
James are my favourites.
Oh, they're fantastic. Oasis, in those days, to be fair, there's a little bit of revisionism, I think, going on, people saying that they're not that good and they weren't that good. They were. I was a 20-year-old. They were lads who wore the same clothes as me, stood in front of it, doing what I aspired and
what you dreamt of doing.
Couldn't do it, yeah.
Not in a million
I tried playing
years.
Guitar and didn't get anywhere near it, absolutely. I still try now and still fail miserably.
I bet you don't. I bet you're better than you realise. But there was something about that self-belief that was quite awe-inspiring, wasn't there?
It was fantastic. Those 3 or 4 years going around to as many gigs, I think I did about 30-ish in that period of time. Was fantastic. I did see them a couple of times when obviously the lineups changed. I saw them in '99 at the Reebok a couple of times. Okay. I saw them in 2009 in Heaton Park.
Is there a butt coming?
Well, the but is, I was saying to your producer that I'm literally looking at Heaton Park now because I live next door to the park. And I have no intention of going around and watching it, if I'm being brutally honest with you.
Why not, mate?
The strong rumours are it's just Liam and Noel and Noel's High Flying Birds is going to be the band, so it's not Oasis, if I'm being brutally honest.
Well, it hasn't been Oasis since...
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. But I mean, to be fair, this year
95.
I have seen
95, technically, has it?
Yeah, I mean, Whitey joined then, and obviously drummed on Morning Glory. You can argue after that, once Bonehead and Griggs were leaving in 98, 99 time, that probably where it all changed. Like I said, I've not seen them that many times since then. Probably 4 or 5.
How many of them would need to come back? Because Bonehead still plays a lot with Liam, doesn't he?
He plays with Liam. I was about to say, I have seen both Liam and Noel this summer. I saw Liam at the Co-op.
Oh, so you love them enough to go and see their new projects?
I went to those. Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that's really interesting.
I just don't think, for me, for the money, and Heaton Park is not a great venue. I've done a few concerts there. It's not a great venue. And the other advantage, to be fair, James, I can put a chair in the front garden with a couple
and
of
you'll be able to hear it
wind,
anyway.
In the wind's blowing the right
What's
direction.
What's not to like?
The Stone Roses. I went on one night, Stone Roses, but the other 2 nights were Note Perfect in my front garden.
There's a phrase no one's ever used about Ian Brown before.
Well, I did realise that when I said it, yeah.
I was there. That was when they were supported by Primal Scream.
That's right, yeah.
That was an amazing... I mean, again, for reasons that were not necessarily exclusively musical, it was a magical experience to be there for that reunion. Do you not get any dispensation from the council? Do you not get a free ticket? Or if you're right next door to it?
Sadly not.
Really?
Sadly no.
Nothing at all?
In fact,
Go on.
I'm on the side of the park that I'm on, when we have the Park Life Festival and everything else that goes on, no one even parks on this side. I'm on the quieter side of the park, so the front end.
So it's win-win, except no freebies.
You get no freebies. No. When Oasis played there in 2009, we lived just around the other side of the park, and I did plan on.
In the rhythm of hearts, a bond that never falls apart. Through the highs and through the lows, together our connection grows. Our connection grows. From childhood dreams to grown-up schemes, we navigate life's endless streams. Hand in hand we face the night. Side by side we find the light. Brotherhood forever strong, in each other's arms where we belong. Through the storm and through the fire, our bond will never tire.
Putting a burger van, like a little barbecue in front of the front garden, and I'm glad I didn't, because you wouldn't have known there was a concert on, because the police closed all the roads up, and you have to show tickets.
At the opposite end of the opposite end of the, it's like Wimbledon during the tennis, when everybody who's got a drive on that bit near where the tennis is, they've all got like some stall outside flocking something. I don't know what the law is, what the rules are on it. Thank you, Stephen. Julia's in Birmingham. To tell me, A, why you're so excited about Oasis, and B, why so few women have called me this hour. And try not to... Anyway, you carry on, Julie.
A, I wouldn't say I'm excited about their announcement, but I will be probably trying to get tickets.
Okay.
Just because it feels like the right thing to do.
Sounds like going to church.
Yeah, well, yes. I am Catholic.
So. Oh, fair enough. You don't want the guilt. So are they, of course, Irish Catholics originally. So you don't want the guilt to kick in. If I don't go along, I'll have to go to confession.
That's it. I have seen them before many years ago, I think it was 96, at Nebworth, and they were really underwhelming. Oh. The Prodigy had been on just before them, who were amazing, great stage presence, and then they came on and it was like, a bit drab, even though, listening to their albums at home was amazing and all of that. It just seeing them live didn't match.
So fingers crossed this time that they live up to expectations. I mean, it's less. Yeah. They're not like they don't. It's not Mick Jagger, is he? He just stands dead still in front of the microphone. We're not going to have that. He doesn't have to prance and jump around the stage. I wonder what the magic depends upon. Whether they're getting on with each other, whether they're communicating with each other, whether they're enjoying themselves. All of these things are going to be factors.
I think it's just a big shock, isn't it? I think, to lots of people that they're able to put their differences aside.
Well, for 40 million quid, I'd put my differences with anyone aside. I'd do a duet with Suella Braverman for 40 million quid.
Dear.
No, all right, maybe not. Thank you. It is 12:56. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Quick shout to Gethin, who's been listening on the running machine for the last half an hour. Finishing my 30-minute workout, a member of management came over to inform me that my headphones weren't actually plugged in and I'd been enlightening everyone in the gym with your fantastic programme. No wonder I couldn't hear you properly. Thank you, Gethin, and thank you for spreading the word. Ella's in Hackney. Ella, probably the last word on this. What's it going to be?
Oh, hi, James. Yes, I'm coming from a female perspective.
Excellent.
Super excited. I'm 30 years old, so I grew up with Oasis as a soundtrack to my childhood. Parents playing it in the car, journeys everywhere. So I know the lyrics like my second language. I sung like Wonderwall before I could say many words.
You're like in between my children and me. And you're the proof, really, of what I said right at the beginning of this hour, that they had their transgenerational appeal is extraordinary, partly because of the technology that's sprung up in the decades that they've been famous, because now everybody can listen to them whenever they want.
100%. I think it will touch everyone. I'll go with my mum or whoever, really. It's just such a throwback. So, yeah.
Will you? I'd be nice if you could go with your mum, because I floated this boat last night, and I'm not quite sure that going with mum and dad is going to transcend the appeal of going with mates. It depends. It depends on what sort of tickets they want. I think probably it would be the bank of mum and dad. But it'd be lovely for people to go with their parents. And I wonder how much. I wonder how many bands you could say that about. It was such clarity. A 30-year-old woman in Hackney, a 52-year-old man in Leicester Square, 18-year-olds listening, 16-year-olds listening, all have a personal relationship with Oasis, which is when I embark upon my really boring TED talk about the role that streaming has played in the human relationship, the generational relationship with recorded music. But you'll have to listen back on Catch Up to treat yourself to that, because I'm done for another day. And indeed, if you missed any of the show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you will also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So do download the Global Player for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish in for Tom Swarbrick. But now it's Sheila Fogarty. 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 But now it's Sheila Fogarty.